Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Officer Marcus Chen pulled his patrol car into the empty parking lot of Miller's Auto Parts at 11:47 p.m., the harsh fluorescent security lights casting sickly yellow pools across cracked asphalt still wet from the evening's rain. The October night in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, carried the sharp bite of approaching winter, and Chen could see his breath forming small puffs as he rolled down his window to better monitor the sounds of his patrol sector. His radio had been experiencing intermittent interference all evening. Brief bursts of static interrupting routine dispatch calls, occasional voices bleeding through from what sounded like adjacent emergency frequencies. Chen had been patrolling Millbrook's night shift for 6 years, long enough to know that radio problems weren't uncommon, especially during atmospheric disturbances. The department's Motorola APX 6000 radios were reliable but aging, and the repeater tower on Miller's Hill had been experiencing issues since a lightning strike 3 months ago. Still, tonight's interference felt different, more systematic, almost purposeful in its timing. Unit 23. Respond to 1247 Riverside Drive. Domestic disturbance, caller reporting shouting, and possible weapons involved. Chen reached for his radio to acknowledge the call, but the transmission dissolved into white noise before he could key his mic. He tried again, pressing the transmit button firmly and speaking clearly. Nothing. The radio's LED display flickered erratically, showing channel readings that didn't correspond to any frequency in the department's allocation. Through the static, he heard something that made his blood run cold. His own voice, crystal clear and unmistakable, responding to the domestic disturbance call he'd never acknowledged. Unit 23, en route to Riverside Drive. ETA, approximately 6 minutes, but Chen was sitting 15 miles away from Riverside Drive in an auto parts parking lot, his radio apparently malfunctioning. Someone was using his call sign, speaking with what sounded exactly like his voice, responding to emergency calls in his name. The implications hit him immediately. If someone was impersonating him on department frequencies, where was the backup going for this domestic call? Who was actually responding to what could be a life-threatening situation? Chen grabbed his personal cell phone and dialed the department's non-emergency line, hoping to reach dispatch directly. The call went straight to a busy signal, a mechanical, old-fashioned busy tone that shouldn't exist in their modern digital phone system. The Millbrook Police Department used a computerized dispatch system that automatically rolled calls to backup lines, county dispatch, or state police if all primary lines were occupied. A busy signal was impossible. He started his engine and began driving rapidly toward Riverside Drive, his mind racing through possibilities. Radio jammers existed. He'd seen them used in movies and knew they were available to civilians, but they typically blocked signals entirely rather than selectively replacing them. Voice synthesis technology was advancing rapidly. He'd read articles about deepfake audio, but real-time voice replication over radio frequencies would require sophisticated equipment and detailed knowledge of police protocols and procedures. This wasn't some teenager with a police scanner and too much time on his hands. Someone with serious technical capabilities and intimate knowledge of the Millbrook Police Department's operations was orchestrating something elaborate and dangerous. The silence was broken by his radio crackling back to life with perfect clarity. All units, we have an officer down at 1247 Riverside Drive. Unit 23 is not responding to radio contact. Dispatch medical units and all available backup immediately. Chen's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he processed what he'd just heard. According to the radio traffic, he was down, possibly injured or worse, at a scene he'd never reached. But the voice giving the emergency update wasn't the usual evening dispatcher, Janet Rodriguez, whose slight Puerto Rican accent and professional demeanor Chen knew well from hundreds of routine calls. This voice belonged to his sergeant, Tom Bradley, whose shift had ended at 7 p.m. and who should have been home with his wife and twin daughters, helping with homework or watching the evening news. The pieces of a horrifying puzzle began arranging themselves in Chen's mind. Someone wasn't just impersonating individual officers. They were coordinating multiple fake identities across the entire radio network, creating a parallel emergency response system where backup units that didn't exist were being dispatched to calls that might not be real, while genuine officers like himself were being isolated and cut off from actual dispatch communications. Chen pressed the accelerator harder, pushing his Crown Victoria patrol car through the winding streets of Millbrook's residential areas toward Riverside Drive. But even as he drove, he knew with growing certainty what he would find when he arrived. The address would be empty or occupied by confused residents who had never placed a 911 call, who had no idea why police were converging on their quiet neighborhood at midnight on a Tuesday. The question that terrified him was simpler and more immediate. While fake backup was being sent to fake emergencies, what real crimes were happening in the blind spots being created across the city? The house at 1247 Riverside Drive sat dark and peaceful in the middle of a tree-lined street of modest two-story colonials, most built in the 1960s when Millbrook was expanding beyond its original downtown core. No other patrol cars were visible, no ambulances, no signs of the violent domestic situation that had supposedly brought Chen racing across town with lights and sirens. The windows reflected his headlight beams like dead eyes, and the only movement came from wind-blown leaves skittering across the front lawn. Chen circled the block twice before approaching the house, every instinct honed by 6 years of police work screaming that this was a setup. He'd responded to hundreds of domestic calls, and there were always signs. Neighbors gathered on porches, lights on throughout the house, sometimes visible damage to doors or windows. This residence showed none of those indicators. The homeowners, an elderly couple named Morrison, answered the door confused and concerned after Chen's persistent knocking. Mr. Morrison, a retired postal worker in his 70s wearing a bathrobe and slippers, peered past Chen into the darkness with obvious worry. "Officer, is everything all right out here? We've been asleep since about 10 o'clock. Haven't heard any disturbances in the neighborhood." Mrs. Morrison appeared behind her husband, wrapping a faded housecoat tighter around herself. "We did hear sirens earlier," she added, "but they seem to be going away from our street, not toward it. Is someone hurt somewhere?" Sirens going away from the neighborhood. Chen's radio had reported multiple units responding to this exact address, but the emergency vehicles had been moving in the opposite direction. The fake domestic call had served as a sophisticated distraction, drawing attention and resources away from something happening elsewhere in the city. Chen apologized for disturbing the couple and returned to his patrol car, parked under a streetlight that illuminated the steam rising from his vehicle's hood in the cold air. He tried his radio again, keying the mic with deliberate precision. "Dispatch, this is Unit 23. I'm clear at 1247 Riverside Drive. No disturbance found, residents were asleep. Requesting clarification on the nature of the original call and caller information." The response came immediately, and it chilled him to the bone. "Unit 23, you're breaking up badly. Please repeat your last transmission. We're showing you as unresponsive at the scene." but Chen's radio display showed 5 full bars of signal strength, and his transmission had been crystal clear. His communications were being intercepted and blocked, while someone else continued to operate using his identity and call sign. He was being systematically isolated from his own department's command structure. Chen's personal cell phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number with a local area code. Check frequency for 61.325 megahertz. You're not the only one who's been replaced tonight. Park behind Riverside Elementary School in 10 minutes. Come alone. 461.325 megahertz was outside the normal police radio allocations, somewhere in the UHF band typically used by commercial businesses, amateur radio operators, and industrial services. Chen programmed the frequency into his personal radio scanner, a Uniden device he kept for monitoring adjacent jurisdictions and state police communications during major incidents. What he heard through his earpiece made his stomach drop and his pulse accelerate. Multiple voices, all using familiar call signs from the Millbrook Police Department, were conducting what sounded like coordinated tactical operations across the city. Unit 15, Officer Sarah Martinez, was supposedly pursuing a stolen vehicle through the Northside Industrial District. Unit 8, Officer James Murphy, was responding to an armed robbery in progress at a downtown convenience store. Unit 31, Sergeant Bradley, was coordinating what sounded like a drug bust in the warehouse district near the railroad tracks. But Chen knew the real status and locations of these officers with absolute certainty. Martinez was on vacation in Colorado, attending her sister's wedding. He'd covered 2 of her patrol shifts the previous week. Murphy had called in sick with severe food poisoning just before the shift began, and Chen had seen him leaving the station parking lot looking genuinely ill. Bradley was scheduled off duty and should have been home with his family, definitely not working a tactical operation at midnight. The voice patterns were perfect, not just similar but identical to the officers they were impersonating. The police jargon was flawless, the radio procedures precisely correct, even down to individual speech patterns and habitual phrases that each officer used. Whoever was behind this operation had been studying the Millbrook Police Department's personnel with meticulous attention to detail. Chen grabbed his personal phone and scrolled through his contacts to Sarah Martinez's cell number. The call went directly to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Sarah. I'm probably working or sleeping, so leave a message and I'll get back to you." He tried James Murphy's number next. Murphy answered on the second ring, his voice hoarse and congested. "Marcus? Jesus, what time is it? I feel like death warmed over." "Jim, where are you right now? Specifically, where are you?" "I'm in my bed, obviously. Been here since about 6 o'clock. Throwing up everything I've eaten in the past week." "Why are you—" "Marcus, what's going on? You sound weird." "What about your radio?" "Your department radio. Where is it?" "In my locker at the station, same as always. We're not supposed to take them home, remember." "Marcus, you're scaring me. What's happening?" Chen felt his world tilting as the implications became clear. Someone had access to the department's radio equipment, or technology sophisticated enough to perfectly clone their radio signatures and transmit on department frequencies with the voices of officers who weren't even on duty. This was either an inside job involving someone with physical access to the police station, or a technical operation far more advanced than anything he'd imagined possible. His scanner crackled with a new transmission that made his blood freeze. "All units, be advised we have reports of an officer impersonating Unit 23. Subject is possibly armed and should be considered dangerous. Approach with extreme caution and request backup before contact." Chen stared at the radio in disbelief. He was being framed as the imposter, transformed into a wanted suspect by his own shadow. Every real officer in the city would now consider him a threat to be approached with weapons drawn. His own department, his own colleagues, had been weaponized against him through this sophisticated deception. The anonymous text sender contacted him again. Riverside Elementary. North parking lot. 2 minutes. Turn off your radio and leave your service weapon in your vehicle. Chen hesitated, his training and every principle of officer safety screaming against following anonymous instructions from unknown sources. But conventional backup wasn't available. His own department thought he was a rogue cop who might be armed and dangerous. His radio was compromised, his dispatcher was possibly fake, and someone was using his identity to manipulate emergency responses across the entire city. The elementary school was 6 blocks away, a single-story brick building surrounded by playground equipment that cast strange shadows in the security lighting. As Chen pulled into the north parking lot with his radio turned off and his Glock 22 locked in the trunk of his patrol car, he spotted a single vehicle. A gray Honda Civic with tinted windows and government license plates. As he approached on foot, the driver's window rolled down to reveal a woman in her early 40s with short brown hair and alert eyes that immediately marked her as law enforcement. She wore civilian clothes, jeans and a dark jacket, but carried herself with the unmistakable bearing and watchful posture of a police officer. "Officer Chen? I'm Detective Lisa Hawkins, Pennsylvania State Police, Criminal Investigation Unit. We need to talk, and we need to do it quickly." Detective Hawkins led Chen to a converted surveillance van parked in the shadow of the school's gymnasium. Its exterior designed to look like a commercial HVAC service vehicle complete with company logos and contact information. The interior was a different world entirely, filled with sophisticated radio monitoring equipment, multiple computers displaying real-time signal analysis, and banks of recording devices capturing communications across dozens of frequencies simultaneously. 2 other state police officers were inside, both wearing headphones and monitoring multiple radio channels with the focused intensity of air traffic controllers. The van's windows were tinted to near opacity, and Chen could see that sound-dampening materials lined the walls to prevent electronic surveillance from outside. "How long have you known?" Chen asked, settling into a chair facing an array of monitors that displayed radio traffic patterns across the region. 3 weeks, Hawkins replied, pulling up a digital map of south-central Pennsylvania, marked with clusters of red and blue dots. "We've been tracking coordinated radio manipulation and electronic warfare activities across 6 different police departments in 3 counties. Someone's been running parallel emergency response operations, impersonating officers, creating fictitious emergency calls, and systematically redirecting legitimate police resources." The scope was staggering and immediately obvious from the visual display. Red dots marked confirmed fake emergency calls. Blue dots indicated real crimes that had occurred during periods of radio interference. The pattern was undeniable. Serious crimes were being committed in specific geographic areas, while police response was being diverted to fictitious emergencies in completely different locations. "Tonight alone," Officer Rebecca Torres, one of the monitoring technicians, explained while adjusting her sophisticated direction-finding equipment, "we've documented fake emergency calls that successfully pulled patrol units away from a bank robbery in progress in Harrisburg, a home invasion with hostages in Lancaster, and what appears to be a coordinated kidnapping attempt in York County. Real victims, real crimes, but no police response because the available resources were chasing electronic ghosts." Chen studied the map display, trying to comprehend the scale of the operation. How are they accomplishing this? The voice replication technology, the radio access, the coordination across multiple jurisdictions? Hawkins pointed to a complex-looking device on one of the workbenches that resembled a military radio crossed with a laptop computer. "We recovered this equipment during a raid on an abandoned warehouse last week. It's called a software-defined radio with integrated voice synthesis capability. Essentially, military-grade electronic warfare equipment that can clone radio signatures, intercept communications, and generate synthetic voice patterns that are virtually indistinguishable from authentic speech." Torres added technical details while monitoring incoming signals. "The voice synthesis component is the most sophisticated we've ever encountered. It can replicate not just the basic sound of someone's voice, but their speech patterns, emotional inflections, stress responses, even their breathing patterns and background mouth sounds. Whoever developed this technology has been collecting and analyzing voice samples from target officers for an extended period, probably months or years. The implications were terrifying in their thoroughness. Every radio transmission, every recorded 911 call, every training exercise where officers spoke into their radios, every traffic stop recorded on dash cameras, all potential source material for building comprehensive voice profiles. The perpetrators had been patient and methodical, building an extensive audio library of every officer in multiple departments. But that's just the technical capability," Hawkins continued, highlighting different sections of the map. "The real sophistication is operational and intelligence-based. They know detailed patrol schedules, which officers are on duty during specific shifts, which ones are on vacation or medical leave, who's attending training or court appearances. They understand radio protocols, police procedures, individual personality quirks, even personal relationships between officers and supervisors." Chen felt a chill as another piece of the puzzle fell into place. "They're not just replicating our voices and radio signatures. They've been conducting detailed surveillance of our department, studying our operations, learning our vulnerabilities and weak points." Torres suddenly straightened, pressing her headphones closer to her ears and making rapid adjustments to her monitoring equipment. "I'm picking up increased activity on the coordination frequency. Multiple encrypted channels, high-level traffic." She worked quickly at her computer, running sophisticated decryption algorithms in real time. "It's the command and control network. Someone's giving orders for a major operation." The voice that emerged from the speakers was electronically distorted, but clearly authoritative, giving detailed instructions. Phase 2, initiating in 15 minutes. All frequency walkers maintain current operational assignments. Primary target is confirmed mobile on Highway 283 eastbound. Secondary targets proceed as planned. Maintain radio discipline and operational security. "Frequency walkers," Hawkins repeated grimly. "That's their operational term for the voice impersonators, and they're tracking multiple specific targets. This isn't random chaos, it's a coordinated operation with defined objectives." Chen's compromised police radio, which he'd left turned on in his patrol car to monitor, suddenly crackled to life audibly through the van's comprehensive monitoring system. "Unit 23, respond immediately to officer needs assistance at Millbrook Memorial Hospital, Emergency Department. Detective requesting immediate backup for in-progress situation." The hospital was 12 miles away through winding rural roads. If Chen responded to this apparent emergency, he'd be isolated again, drawn away from the state police operation and potentially into a trap. But if he didn't respond, and there was a genuine officer in trouble, "It's a trap," Hawkins said, reading his thoughts and monitoring the signal analysis equipment. "They're trying to separate you from our operation, get you isolated where they can control the tactical situation." Torres was frantically working her direction-finding equipment, triangulating the source of the transmission. The signals originating from inside the hospital complex itself. They're physically present at the location they're directing you to respond to. The coordination frequency crackled again with an ominous update. Frequency Walker 23 is not responding to tactical direction. Subject appears to have detected our operation. Initiate direct engagement protocol immediately. Chen felt the blood drain from his face as the implications hit him. Direct engagement protocol. They're not just manipulating radio communications anymore. They're escalating to physical confrontation and direct action. Through the scanner, his own voice responded to the hospital emergency call with perfect clarity. Unit 23, en route to Memorial Hospital Emergency Department. ETA 14 minutes. That's definitely not me responding, Chen said unnecessarily, his mouth dry with fear. Someone else is heading to the hospital using my identity and call sign. Hawkins was already reaching for her encrypted state police radio, trying to coordinate with other units. All available units, this is State Police Detective Hawkins, badge number 4471. We have a code 33 emergency situation at Millbrook Memorial Hospital. Unknown subjects impersonating police officers are operating in the area with hostile intent. Approach with extreme caution and consider all unverified personnel as potential threats. But her transmission was immediately met with the same white noise interference that had plagued Chen's radio throughout the night. Someone was running sophisticated jamming equipment, creating localized bubbles of communication chaos around their operational areas. They're jamming our primary frequencies, Torres confirmed, monitoring her spectrum analysis displays. Selective frequency interference targeting law enforcement bands. They can communicate freely on their encrypted channels, but they're blocking our ability to coordinate with other units or call for backup. The van's monitoring system suddenly detected a massive surge of activity across multiple frequencies as the operation shifted into its next phase. Fake officers were being deployed to tactical positions across the city. Artificial emergencies were being generated to justify their presence and clear areas of legitimate law enforcement. And somewhere in the coordinated chaos, Chen realized with growing horror the primary target mentioned in their communications was about to be engaged. The coordination frequency revealed the true scope and deadly purpose of the operation as Chen, Hawkins, and Torres monitored the communications from their surveillance van. What had initially appeared to be random radio manipulation was actually a sophisticated manhunt disguised as routine police operations. Frequency Walker 7, target vehicle identified as dark blue BMW sedan, license plate JMK4471, spotted northbound on Highway 283 approaching exit 21. Maintain visual surveillance but do not engage until authorization. Frequency Walker 12. Establish roadblock at Highway 283 and Route 15 intersection. Make it appear routine. D. U. I checkpoint protocols. Divert all civilian traffic. Frequency Walker 23. Your mission is to redirect real law enforcement units away from Highway 283 corridor. Create multiple incidents requiring response in zones 4 and 7. Priority incidents only. They're hunting someone specific, Chen realized, his voice tight with understanding. Using fake police identities to track and isolate a target while simultaneously using police impersonation to clear the area of actual law enforcement officers. Torres was frantically working her computer, cross-referencing license plate databases and trying to identify the target. Highway 283 runs northeast toward Harrisburg, then connects to Interstate 83 north toward the Maryland border. If someone's fleeing the area. Hawkins was already on her encrypted state police frequency, but the response was frustratingly bureaucratic. Detective Hawkins were showing multiple Millbrook PD units already deployed on Highway 283, conducting a routine sobriety checkpoint. Additional resources are not available at this time due to ongoing operations in Lancaster County. "Those aren't real units," Hawkins shouted into her radio, her professional composure finally cracking. "Someone is impersonating police officers and manipulating your entire dispatch system." But the voice on the other end remained maddeningly calm and procedural. "Detective, we'll need verification through proper channels before we can countermand existing operations. Please contact your supervisor and follow standard protocols for interagency coordination." Bureaucracy and established procedures were working against them. The state police dispatcher couldn't immediately distinguish between legitimate law enforcement operations and sophisticated impersonation. Standard protocols required multiple levels of confirmation before deploying resources to counter what appeared to be authorized police activities. Chen made a decision that violated every principle of officer safety he'd learned in 6 years of police work. "I'm going after them. I'm the only officer who knows what's really happening, and I might be the only one in position to prevent whatever they're planning. Marcus, you absolutely cannot do that. You'll be one officer against an unknown number of suspects with military-grade equipment, tactical coordination, and detailed intelligence about police procedures. But I'm also the only one they're not expecting," Chen replied, checking his service weapon and spare magazines. "They think I'm responding to their fake hospital emergency call. They have no idea I'm here with you, that I've detected their operation." Through the monitoring equipment, they heard Chen's impersonator arriving at Memorial Hospital. Unit 23 on scene at Memorial Hospital Emergency Department, establishing perimeter and coordinating with the hospital security. "Go," Hawkins said suddenly, her tactical instincts overriding her caution. "We'll try to coordinate with legitimate units through back channels, but you're right. You might be the only officer in position to intervene before they complete whatever they're planning." Chen grabbed a portable radio programmed with state police frequencies and headed for his patrol car, his mind racing through tactical possibilities. As he drove toward Highway 283, he monitored both the fake police communications and the real coordination frequency, slowly piecing together the target and purpose of the elaborate operation. Target confirmed as Dr. Elena Vasquez, 47 years old, forensic pathologist. Subject is en route to federal courthouse in Harrisburg for 9 a.m. testimony tomorrow morning. Vehicle is confirmed as dark blue BMW 328i, license plate JMK4471. Dr. Elena Vasquez. Chen recognized the name immediately from recent news coverage. A forensic pathologist who had been testifying in a massive federal corruption case involving city officials, police department contracts, and evidence tampering across multiple jurisdictions. Her expert testimony had exposed systemic corruption and led to numerous arrests, including 2 police officers from neighboring departments. The coordination frequency provided additional operational details. Dr. Vasquez represents a critical threat to ongoing operations. Federal testimony tomorrow morning will expose additional personnel and compromise future operational capacity. Subject must be eliminated tonight. Use standard traffic stop protocol to avoid suspicion. Chen's blood ran cold as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't just an abduction or intimidation attempt. It was a carefully planned assassination disguised as routine police work. Dr. Vasquez would be pulled over by what appeared to be legitimate police officers conducting a sobriety checkpoint, and her death would be staged to look like an unfortunate accident or justified use of force during a traffic stop. He pushed his patrol car to dangerous speeds through the rural roads leading to Highway 283. Emergency lights activated, but siren off to avoid alerting the fake officers to his approach. The coordinators were tracking multiple police frequencies, but they wouldn't expect a legitimate officer to be actively hunting them. 3 miles from the highway intersection, Chen spotted the roadblock in the distance. 2 patrol cars with full emergency lighting activated. Officers in complete uniform conducting what appeared to be a textbook sobriety checkpoint. Professional setup, proper vehicle positioning, correct lighting patterns. Any driver would naturally comply with what appeared to be legitimate police authority. Chen pulled off the highway and observed through binoculars from a concealed position. The setup was nearly perfect, but his trained eye caught subtle inconsistencies that revealed the deception. One of the officers was wearing a duty belt with equipment that didn't match Pennsylvania State Police standards. The radio was wrong. The handcuff case was positioned incorrectly, and the badge wasn't quite the right size or finish. His portable radio crackled with urgent coordination traffic. Target vehicle approaching checkpoint from the south. ETA 3 minutes. All frequency walkers maintain positions and prepare for engagement. A dark blue BMW was indeed approaching the roadblock, Doctor. Vasquez clearly visible in the driver's seat. She was slowing down naturally, as any law-abiding citizen would when encountering what appeared to be a police checkpoint. Completely unaware that she was driving into a carefully orchestrated trap designed by the very people she had helped expose through her forensic expertise. Chen made a split-second decision that would either save Dr. Vasquez's life or end his law enforcement career. He activated his emergency lights and accelerated toward the roadblock at high speed, using his patrol car's public address system to broadcast a warning. Attention, Dr. Vasquez in the blue BMW. This is Officer Chen, badge number 4471, Millbrook Police Department. The roadblock ahead is fraudulent. These are not legitimate police officers. Do not stop your vehicle. Continue through the checkpoint and proceed to the nearest state police barracks. The effect was immediate and chaotic. The fake officers at the roadblock realized their operation was blown and began abandoning their positions, some reaching for weapons while others ran toward escape vehicles. Dr. Vasquez, confused but recognizing the genuine fear and urgency in Chen's voice, made a critical decision and accelerated through the checkpoint without stopping, her BMW disappearing into the darkness ahead. Chen's radio exploded with conflicting transmissions as the entire operation began to unravel. The coordination frequency was screaming abort orders and escape instructions, while fake police voices tried desperately to maintain the illusion that Chen was the actual threat to public safety. All units, Unit 23 has gone rogue and is interfering with legitimate police operations. Officer is armed and should be considered extremely dangerous, but Chen was already in pursuit of Dr. Vasquez, trying to establish communication and provide protection while avoiding the fake officers who were now openly pursuing them both with obvious hostile intent. His portable radio connected him to Detective Hawkins. Marcus, we've got legitimate backup finally en route, but you need to get Dr. Vasquez to a secure location immediately. Where? Chen shouted over the sound of sirens and emergency lights behind him. They've compromised radio communications across multiple departments. How do I know which backup units are real and which are more impersonators? The answer came from Dr. Vasquez herself. With remarkable presence of mind, she had pulled into the fortified parking lot of the Pennsylvania State Police Barracks on Route 15. The one location the fake officers couldn't possibly follow without completely revealing themselves. Inside the Pennsylvania State Police Barracks, surrounded by officers whose identities could be verified through multiple independent channels and biometric systems, the full scope of the conspiracy began to emerge. Dr. Vasquez, shaken but unharmed and remarkably composed for someone who had just escaped. an assassination attempt, provided the critical context that made sense of the sophisticated operation. "The federal corruption case I've been testifying in," she explained to Chen Hawkins and State Police Captain Rodriguez, settling into a chair in the secure conference room. "It wasn't just about isolated evidence tampering or individual bad actors. Our investigation uncovered a systematic network of private defense contractors who had been paid tens of millions of dollars over the past 5 years for police equipment upgrades, radio systems, communication networks, surveillance technology, evidence storage systems. But the equipment either contained deliberate vulnerabilities or had unauthorized backdoors installed for remote access." The picture began to coalesce with frightening clarity. Someone with legitimate access to police communication infrastructure had been systematically compromising law enforcement equipment across multiple jurisdictions during routine upgrades and maintenance. The voice cloning and frequency manipulation weren't just sophisticated technical achievements. They were the direct result of hardware and software backdoors deliberately installed in officially purchased and authorized police equipment. "But the operational intelligence," Chen interrupted, "knowing specific officers' schedules, personal speech patterns, individual work habits, family situations, that required inside information that couldn't come from just technical access." Dr. Vasquez nodded grimly, consulting notes from her forensic investigation. The corruption case revealed that personnel records, duty rosters, disciplinary files, and even internal communications were being systematically accessed and sold. Someone inside each affected department was providing detailed operational intelligence to the defense contractors, who were then selling that information to interested parties. Captain Rodriguez was coordinating with multiple state and federal agencies, trying to determine the full extent of the compromised equipment and how many departments were affected. "We're looking at systematic infiltration of law enforcement communications across at least 6 counties," he reported to the group. "The companies that installed our security systems, upgraded our radios, and maintained our networks were the same ones systematically undermining them." Detective Hawkins had been monitoring the coordination frequency, which had gone largely silent after the failed assassination attempt. "They're shutting down their operation and destroying evidence," she reported. "But we recorded enough communications to identify at least some of the participants and their operational methods. The technical analysis revealed the true sophistication of the conspiracy. The perpetrators had been collecting voice samples and operational intelligence for over 3 years, building comprehensive behavioral and linguistic profiles of individual officers. They knew not just how Chen sounded when he spoke normally, but how his voice changed under stress, his typical response patterns during emergencies, his personal speech habits, even his relationships with other officers and supervisors. They've been conducting practice operations, Torres explained, reviewing recorded communications from previous months. Small-scale disruptions to test their techniques, monitoring how departments responded to different scenarios, refining their approach based on real-world results. Tonight's operation was supposed to be their masterpiece, eliminating a key witness while maintaining perfect operational security and plausible deniability. Chen felt a chill as he realized how close they had come to complete success. If I hadn't noticed the specific radio anomalies, if I hadn't questioned the fake emergency calls and investigated the inconsistencies, Dr. Vasquez would be dead, and it would look like a completely justified police action, Hawkins finished. Her death would be officially recorded as the result of resisting during a routine traffic stop, or an unfortunate accident during a legitimate police checkpoint. The fake officers would disappear, and the real officers responding to their manufactured emergencies would have perfect alibis. The investigation that followed would eventually involve the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and multiple federal agencies, but the immediate threat had been neutralized. However, Chen couldn't shake the feeling that they had only discovered one operational cell of a much larger and more sophisticated conspiracy. As dawn broke over the rural Pennsylvania landscape, the various fake emergencies created throughout the night began to resolve themselves. Real officers, initially confused by the conflicting radio traffic and contradictory information, gradually regained control of their communication systems. But significant damage had already been done. Several serious crimes had occurred while police resources were diverted by phantom emergency calls. How many other operations like this have succeeded? Chen asked Captain Rodriguez, voicing the question that was haunting everyone in the room. How many times have they used this capability without anyone detecting the deception? The answer, when it eventually came through comprehensive federal investigation, was deeply disturbing. Analysis of unexplained communication outages, unsolved crimes that occurred during radio interference, and mysterious accidents or deaths involving key witnesses revealed a pattern spanning multiple states and extending back at least 4 years. The network Chen had stumbled onto had been conducting successful elimination operations disguised as legitimate police work for an extended period. Dr. Vasquez's case had been different because the perpetrators had grown overconfident, attempting a complex operation in an area where Detective Hawkins's team had already been monitoring suspicious radio activity. Their previous successes had bred carelessness, and Chen's attention to detail and willingness to trust his instincts over official procedures had provided the crucial thread that unraveled their entire conspiracy. But as Chen completed his comprehensive incident report in the growing daylight, one detail troubled him more than any other. The coordination frequency had mentioned primary target and secondary operations throughout the night. Dr. Vasquez had been the primary target, but what were the secondary operations that had continued while they focused on saving her life? The answer came 3 days later, when federal investigators revealed the full scope of the night's activities. During the hours of coordinated radio chaos, 4 other individuals in different states had died in apparent accidents or justified police encounters. All were connected to various corruption investigations. All had occurred during unexplained communication outages in their respective jurisdictions. All had been eliminated by fake officers while real police were diverted to fictitious emergencies. Chen had saved Dr. Vasquez, but the network had successfully accomplished most of its operational objectives that night. The realization that his heroic intervention had been merely a partial victory in a much larger war haunted him more than the original discovery of the radio manipulation and voice cloning conspiracy. 2 weeks after the attempted assassination, Chen found himself in a secure conference room at the FBI's Philadelphia field office, surrounded by federal agents, technical specialists, and evidence that painted a picture of corruption and conspiracy far more extensive than anyone had initially imagined. Special Agent Monica Reeves, a 20-year veteran of the Bureau's Cybercrime Division, laid out photographs, documents, and technical schematics that represented months of investigation following Chen's discovery of the frequency manipulation operation. Officer Chen, your instincts that night saved not just Dr. Vasquez's life, but potentially exposed one of the most sophisticated attacks on law enforcement infrastructure we've ever encountered, Agent Reeves began, pointing to a wall-mounted display showing connections between dozens of individuals and organizations across multiple states. The network was vast and intricate. The primary conspirators included corrupt police officials, defense contractors with access to communication systems, organized crime figures seeking to eliminate witnesses, and even foreign intelligence operatives interested in disrupting American law enforcement capabilities. The voice synthesis technology was just the tip of the iceberg, explained Doctor. Sarah Kim, a technical specialist from the FBI's Technical Services Unit. The equipment we recovered includes artificial intelligence systems capable of real-time language processing, behavioral analysis software that could predict individual officer responses to specific scenarios, and even psychological profiling algorithms designed to identify the most effective manipulation techniques for different personality types. Chen studied the technical specifications with growing unease. You're saying they weren't just impersonating us, they were psychologically profiling us to predict how we'd react to different situations. Exactly, Dr. Kim confirmed. They had detailed psychological profiles of over 200 law enforcement officers across 6 states. The profiles included stress responses, decision-making patterns under pressure, personal relationships that could be exploited, even family situations that might affect judgment during critical incidents. Agent Reeves pulled up a specific file on her laptop. Chen, Marcus, Badge 4471, Millbrook Police Department, 6 years service, single, lives alone in apartment complex on Maple Street. Responds well to authority but tends to question inconsistencies. High attention to detail, particularly regarding radio protocols. Shows initiative but follows procedure. Vulnerability. Isolation during night shifts makes him susceptible to manipulation through fake emergency scenarios. Chen felt violated in a way that went beyond anything he'd experienced during the actual operation. They knew everything about me, my habits, my personality, even my address. The psychological profiling was the key to their success, Agent Reeves continued. They didn't just randomly impersonate officers. They carefully selected targets based on personality assessments and predicted responses. They knew which officers would question anomalies, which ones would follow orders without question, and which ones could be isolated and manipulated most effectively. The scope of the surveillance was staggering. The conspirators had been monitoring social media accounts, tracking credit card purchases, analyzing cell phone location data, and even conducting physical surveillance to build comprehensive profiles of their targets. They knew where officers lived, where they shopped, what restaurants they frequented, who they dated, and what their personal vulnerabilities might be. But the most disturbing aspect, Dr. Kim added, is that they were testing different manipulation techniques and measuring their effectiveness. They had been running practice operations for years, creating small disruptions and carefully monitoring how different officers and departments responded. They were essentially conducting behavioral experiments on law enforcement personnel. Chen remembered the months of minor radio interference, the occasional dispatch errors, the small technical glitches that everyone had attributed to aging equipment or atmospheric conditions. The radio problems we'd been having, those weren't equipment failures. They were tests. Correct, they were measuring response times, testing voice synthesis accuracy, evaluating how long they could maintain deceptions before being detected. Every time you responded to a call, every time you used your radio, they were collecting data and refining their techniques. Agent Reeves showed Chen surveillance photographs taken over several months. Images of him leaving his apartment, stopping for coffee, arriving at work, even exercising at the local gym. They knew your routine better than you did. They could predict where you'd be at any given time, how you'd respond to different scenarios, even what personal stresses might affect your judgment. The investigation had uncovered similar surveillance of officers in multiple states. The conspirators had been patient and methodical, spending years building the intelligence foundation necessary to support their operation. When they finally acted, they had comprehensive knowledge of their targets and near-perfect ability to predict law enforcement responses. How many operations succeeded before we detected them? Chen asked, though he dreaded the answer. We've identified at least 12 incidents over the past 3 years where witnesses in federal cases died under suspicious circumstances during periods of radio interference. Agent Reeves replied grimly. Most were classified as accidents or justified police actions at the time. Dr. Vasquez would have been number 13. The federal investigation had expanded to include the National Security Agency and Department of Homeland Security, given the implications for national security when law enforcement communications could be systematically compromised. The technology used in the operation was sophisticated enough to potentially affect military communications as well. "What about the inside sources?" Chen asked. Someone in each department was providing information. Agent Reeves's expression darkened. "We've identified 17 law enforcement personnel across 6 states who were providing information to the contractors. Most were being blackmailed. The conspirators had evidence of minor corruption, personal indiscretions, or financial problems. A few were being paid directly. 2 were ideologically motivated, believing they were exposing corruption in law enforcement. The betrayal was perhaps more disturbing than the technical aspects of the conspiracy. These were fellow officers, people who had sworn the same oath, taken the same risks, but had been turned against their colleagues and departments through various forms of coercion and manipulation. The investigation is ongoing," Agent Reeves concluded, "but we've disrupted their primary operational capability. However, we have to assume that other cells exist, possibly using similar technology and techniques in different regions." Chen left the FBI briefing with a profound sense of unease that went far beyond the immediate threat he had helped neutralize. The conspiracy had revealed fundamental vulnerabilities in law enforcement that extended beyond technical systems to the psychological and social factors that held police departments together: trust, communication, and shared purpose. 6 months after the frequency manipulation conspiracy was exposed, Officer Marcus Chen found himself assigned to a new position within the Millbrook Police Department: Information Security Liaison, a role created specifically in response to the lessons learned from his encounter with the frequency walkers. The department had undergone comprehensive changes following the federal investigation. All radio equipment had been replaced with systems featuring enhanced encryption and authentication protocols. New procedures required voice verification for critical communications, and backup communication channels had been established using different technologies and frequencies. But Chen knew that technical solutions could only address part of the problem. The conspirators had succeeded not just because of their sophisticated equipment, but because they understood human psychology and exploited the trust that made police work possible. During his first week in the new position, Chen was reviewing communication logs when he noticed something that made him pause. A pattern of brief radio outages, lasting just seconds rather than minutes, had been occurring across the department's coverage area. Too short to trigger automated alerts, too infrequent to seem significant, but following a pattern that reminded him of the testing phase that had preceded the major operation. Chen immediately contacted Detective Hawkins, who had been assigned to a joint state and federal task force investigating similar communications security threats. Her response was immediate and concerning. "We've been tracking similar micro-outages in 4 other states," Hawkins told him during their secure phone conversation. Brief interruptions in law enforcement communications that could be either equipment testing or intelligence gathering. The pattern suggests someone is probing for vulnerabilities in the new security systems. The implications were clear. The network Chen had helped expose was either reconstituting itself with new technology, or other similar organizations were adopting their techniques. The frequency manipulation capability hadn't been eliminated. It had evolved and adapted. Chen's new responsibilities included training other officers to recognize signs of communication manipulation, but he often felt like he was fighting an uphill battle against both technological advancement and human nature. Officers wanted to trust their radios, their dispatchers, their colleagues. That trust was essential for effective police work, but it also created vulnerabilities that could be exploited by sophisticated adversaries. During a training session for regional law enforcement, Chen presented a scenario based on his real experience. Your radio reports an officer down at a location 15 miles from your current position. The voice sounds exactly like your dispatcher. The procedures are followed correctly, but something feels slightly off. What do? The responses varied, but most officers indicated they would respond immediately to assist a fellow officer in trouble. The impulse to help a colleague in danger was so strong that it overrode analytical thinking. Exactly the psychological vulnerability that the frequency walkers had exploited. The technology exists to perfectly replicate voices and radio protocols, Chen explained to the group. The only defense is heightened awareness of patterns and inconsistencies that might indicate deception. But that awareness has to be balanced against the need to respond quickly to genuine emergencies. After the training session, a veteran sergeant from a neighboring department approached Chen with a troubling question. Officer Chen, if this technology is available to criminals and terrorists, how do we know it's not also being used by our own government? How do we know which orders we receive are legitimate? It was a question that haunted Chen, representing a fundamental erosion of institutional trust that extended far beyond law enforcement. If the voices could be perfectly replicated and communications manipulated, how could anyone be certain of the authenticity of information they received through official channels? The federal investigation had revealed that the frequency manipulation technology was based on research originally conducted for intelligence agencies, designed to disrupt enemy communications and create confusion during military operations. The fact that it had been turned against domestic law enforcement suggested that the boundaries between different applications of electronic warfare technology were not as clear as most people assumed. Chen's apartment had been moved to a secure building with enhanced surveillance, and he varied his daily routines based on security protocols developed by federal agents. The psychological profiles that the conspirators had built meant that his personal vulnerabilities were still known to potentially hostile actors who might seek revenge for his role in exposing their operation. But the most unsettling aspect of his new reality was the constant uncertainty about the authenticity of communications he received. Every radio call, every phone conversation, every text message carried the possibility of deception. The frequency walkers had succeeded in creating a permanent state of doubt about one of the most basic aspects of human interaction: the ability to trust that people were who they claimed to be. During his evening patrols, Chen found himself analyzing every transmission for subtle signs of manipulation. Voice patterns, background noise, timing delays, linguistic choices, all potential indicators of synthetic communication. The hypervigilance was mentally exhausting, but it had become a necessary survival skill in a world where electronic deception was increasingly sophisticated. His radio crackled with a routine dispatch call. Unit 23, respond to a welfare check at 847 Pine Street. Elderly resident hasn't been seen by neighbors for several days. Chen listened carefully to the dispatcher's voice, analyzing the stress patterns, the pronunciation of specific words, the ambient sound in the background. Janet Rodriguez, the evening dispatcher, had a slight accent that affected how she pronounced certain consonants. The radio quality was consistent with the new encrypted system. The background noise matched the dispatch center's acoustic signature. Unit 23, copy. En route to Pine Street for welfare check, Chen responded. But he also activated his backup communication system and verified the call through an independent channel. The address was legitimate. The call had been properly logged, and Mrs. Patricia Williams at 847 Pine Street was indeed concerned about her elderly neighbor. But Chen's verification procedures had become automatic. He could no longer take any communication at face value without independent confirmation. As he completed the welfare check, finding the elderly resident safe, but dealing with a minor medical issue that required an ambulance, Chen reflected on how fundamentally the frequency walker incident had changed his approach to police work. The technology that was supposed to make law enforcement more efficient and coordinated had become a potential weapon against the officers it was designed to serve. His radio remained quiet as he completed his paperwork and prepared to return to patrol. No fake emergencies, no phantom voices, no coordination frequencies bleeding through from the shadows. Just the normal sounds of police work in a small Pennsylvania city where most nights passed without major incident. But Chen knew they were still out there somewhere. The frequency walkers and their technological descendants, adapting their techniques, developing new capabilities, preparing for their next operation. The electronic warfare that had briefly emerged into the open had returned to the shadows, but it hadn't disappeared. The war for authentic communication continued, fought not with weapons or violence, but with trust and deception, verification and doubt. Chen had chosen his side in that conflict, learning to defend the fragile boundaries between genuine and synthetic communication. In a world where voices could be stolen and identities replicated with perfect fidelity, someone had to guard the spaces where truth still lived. 1 year after the frequency walker incident, Chen found himself sitting in a psychologist's office, struggling with the long-term effects of constant hypervigilance and the erosion of trust that had become a permanent feature of his mental landscape. Dr. Rachel Morrison, a specialist in law enforcement trauma, listened as Chen described his current state. "I can't turn it off, Doc. Every phone call, every radio transmission, every conversation, I'm analyzing it for signs of manipulation. I know it's not rational, but I can't help myself. The technology exists to fake anything, so how do I know what's real anymore?" The psychological impact of the frequency walker conspiracy extended far beyond the immediate participants. Officers throughout the region had been affected by the knowledge that their most basic tools of communication could be compromised and used against them. Trust in technology, in procedures, in institutional systems had been fundamentally undermined. "You experienced a form of technological trauma," Dr. Morrison explained. "Your sense of reality was systematically manipulated by people with sophisticated tools and detailed knowledge of your psychology. The hypervigilance you're experiencing is a normal response to that violation of trust." Chen had been promoted to sergeant, partly in recognition of his role in exposing the conspiracy, but the new responsibilities felt overwhelming in the context of his heightened suspicion of all electronic communication. Supervising other officers required constant radio contact, coordination of resources, and trust in information received through various channels, all activities that now triggered anxiety and doubt. "The department has implemented new security protocols," Chen told Dr. Morrison. "Voice verification, encryption, backup systems. But I keep thinking about how sophisticated their technology was, how they stayed ahead of our defenses for years. What if they've developed countermeasures to our countermeasures?" The question reflected a broader issue affecting law enforcement and intelligence agencies worldwide. As defensive technologies improved, offensive capabilities evolved to match them. The frequency manipulation techniques that Chen had encountered were likely already obsolete, replaced by more advanced methods that exploited different vulnerabilities. Dr. Morrison helped Chen understand that his vigilance, while psychologically exhausting, served an important purpose. You're like an early warning system for threats that most people don't even know exist. Your heightened awareness, properly channeled, could help protect others from similar manipulation. This insight led to Chen's involvement in a federal program designed to train law enforcement personnel to recognize and resist various forms of electronic and psychological manipulation. His experience as both a target and discoverer of frequency manipulation made him uniquely qualified to understand the threat from multiple perspectives. During one training session at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Chen presented his case to a room full of federal agents, state police investigators, and local law enforcement officials. The audience included officers who had encountered similar but less sophisticated manipulation attempts in their own jurisdictions. The most important lesson, Chen told the group, is that the technology is only part of the threat. The psychological manipulation is what makes it effective. They studied us, learned our weaknesses, and exploited our instincts to help fellow officers and respond to emergencies. The technical capability enabled the deception, but the psychological understanding made it successful. Questions from the audience revealed that frequency manipulation incidents were more common than most people realized. Many had been dismissed as equipment failures or communication errors. Only in retrospect, with knowledge of the technology's capabilities, did patterns of suspicious activity become apparent. How do we balance necessary vigilance with the trust required for effective police work? Asked a detective from Oregon. If we question every communication, every piece of information, how do we maintain operational effectiveness? It was the central dilemma of law enforcement in an age of sophisticated electronic deception. The answer, Chen had learned through painful experience, required developing new instincts and verification procedures that could operate automatically without paralyzing decision-making. Trust, but verify, Chen replied, borrowing a phrase from a different context. Develop protocols that allow for rapid authentication without slowing down emergency response. Learn to recognize the subtle signs that might indicate deception, but don't let that knowledge prevent you from doing your job when genuine emergencies arise. The federal program that emerged from these training sessions became known as the Communication Security Initiative, designed to help law enforcement agencies develop both technical and procedural defenses against various forms of electronic manipulation. Chen found himself consulting with police departments across the country, helping them identify vulnerabilities and develop countermeasures. But the work took its toll. The constant exposure to stories of manipulation, deception, and technological threats reinforced Chen's sense that the world had become fundamentally untrustworthy. Even his personal relationships suffered as he found himself analyzing conversations with friends and family for signs of deception that couldn't possibly exist. Dr. Morrison helped him understand that healing required learning to distinguish between appropriate professional vigilance and unhealthy paranoia. You need to develop different mental states for different contexts, she explained. Maximum vigilance during high-risk situations, normal trust in low-risk personal interactions. The process was slow and difficult, requiring Chen to consciously train himself to relax his guard in situations where electronic manipulation was unlikely. Family dinners, conversations with friends, routine daily interactions. These needed to be spaces where he could experience normal human trust without constant analysis and verification. 2 years after the frequency walker incident, Chen achieved a measure of psychological balance that allowed him to function effectively both professionally and personally. But the experience had permanently changed his worldview, creating an awareness of technological vulnerability that could never be completely turned off. 3 years after exposing the frequency walker conspiracy, Sergeant Marcus Chen received a call that brought his specialized knowledge back into urgent demand. the FBI's Communications Security Task Force needed his expertise for a new investigation that made the original frequency manipulation operation look simple by comparison. Special Agent Monica Reeves met Chen at a secure facility outside Washington, D.C., where he was briefed on a technological threat that represented the next evolution of electronic warfare against law enforcement. The frequency walkers were using radio manipulation and voice synthesis, Agent Reeves explained, leading Chen through a laboratory filled with cutting-edge monitoring equipment. This new threat involves deepfake video technology integrated with live communication systems. They're not just stealing voices anymore, they're stealing entire visual identities. The demonstration was deeply unsettling. On a large monitor, Chen watched what appeared to be himself conducting a video briefing with other officers, discussing operational plans for a raid that had never occurred. The image quality was perfect, the facial expressions natural, the body language convincing. Only detailed technical analysis revealed that the video was entirely synthetic. "The technology has advanced exponentially, Dr." Sarah Kim explained, now heading the FBI's Digital Forensics Unit. "They can create real-time video of anyone saying anything, doing anything, appearing to be anywhere. Combined with the voice synthesis capabilities we encountered 3 years ago, they can create completely convincing evidence of events that never happened." The implications for law enforcement were staggering. Video evidence had always been considered among the most reliable forms of proof in criminal cases. If that evidence could be perfectly fabricated, the entire justice system faced a crisis of credibility. "We're seeing this technology being used to create false evidence, discredit witnesses, and manipulate legal proceedings," Agent Reeves continued. "But the most sophisticated applications involve real-time manipulation during active operations, making officers think they're receiving orders from superiors who aren't actually present, or creating fake video conferences with officials who are hundreds of miles away." Chen studied the technical specifications with growing alarm. "You're saying they can make me think I'm talking to my chief in real time, receiving direct orders for operational changes, when I'm actually communicating with someone else entirely?" "Exactly. And the psychological impact is even more powerful than radio manipulation, because humans trust visual information more than audio alone. When you see someone you know giving you instructions, your brain naturally accepts the authenticity without question." The new threat had emerged from the same network that Chen had helped expose 3 years earlier. Federal investigations had disrupted their operations but not eliminated their technological capabilities. They had spent the intervening years developing more sophisticated tools and identifying new vulnerabilities in law enforcement systems. The frequency walker incident taught them that radio manipulation alone was vulnerable to detection by aware officers, Dr. Kim explained. They needed something more convincing, more psychologically compelling. Visual deception combined with audio manipulation creates nearly undetectable synthetic communication. Chen was shown examples of the technology being used against law enforcement agencies across the country. Officers had received video calls from supervisors ordering them to abandon surveillance operations, redirect resources to false emergencies, or even stand down during critical arrests. The visual component made the deceptions far more convincing than audio-only manipulation. "How widespread is this?" Chen asked, though he suspected the answer would be disturbing. "We've documented at least 30 incidents over the past 6 months, Agent Reeves replied. "Most went undetected at the time and were only identified during post-incident analysis. The technology is becoming more sophisticated and more accessible to criminals and hostile actors." The federal response involved developing new verification protocols for video communication. But the arms race between defensive and offensive capabilities continued to escalate. As soon as new security measures were implemented, more advanced deception techniques emerged to circumvent them. Chen's role in the new investigation involved training law enforcement personnel to recognize signs of video manipulation and developing rapid authentication procedures that could be used during active operations. But the challenge was more complex than the original frequency walker threat because visual deception was inherently more convincing than audio manipulation alone. The human brain is wired to trust what it sees, Dr. Morrison, the police psychologist, explained during a consultation session. When officers see their chief or supervisor giving them orders via video, their natural response is immediate compliance. Questioning the authenticity of visual communication goes against millions of years of evolutionary psychology. The training programs that emerged from Chen's work focused on developing new mental habits that could operate under stress. Officers learned to look for subtle technical artifacts that might indicate synthetic video, but more importantly, they learned to implement verification procedures even when their instincts said the communication was authentic. Trust your eyes, but verify through independent channels became the new motto. Every video communication during critical operations required confirmation through alternative methods, phone calls to known numbers, radio verification, or physical presence confirmation. But the psychological toll of constant verification was significant. Law enforcement officers were trained to make rapid decisions based on available information, but the new threat environment required slowing down critical communications to authenticate sources and verify instructions. Chen found himself once again at the center of a fundamental shift in how police work functioned in an age of sophisticated technological deception. The tools designed to improve communication and coordination between law enforcement agencies had become weapons that could be used to manipulate and misdirect those same agencies. 5 years after his first encounter with the frequency walkers, Sergeant Marcus Chen found himself responding to a call that seemed ominously familiar. At 11:52 p.m. on a cold October night in Millbrook, his radio crackled with a routine request that immediately triggered his hard-earned instincts for deception. Unit 23. Respond to welfare check at 1247 Riverside Drive. Elderly residents haven't been seen by neighbors for several days. The same address where his nightmare journey into electronic warfare had begun. The same type of call that had been used to manipulate his location and isolate him from legitimate backup. Chen felt his pulse quicken as memories of that night flooded back. The fake emergencies, the stolen voices, the systematic manipulation of his department's entire communication system. But this time, Chen was prepared. His patrol car was equipped with the latest communication security technology, including real-time voice authentication, encrypted backup channels, and direct links to state and federal monitoring systems. More importantly, his training and experience had taught him to recognize patterns that might indicate manipulation. Dispatch, Unit 23. Can you confirm the source of this welfare check request and provide authentication code for verification? Chen responded, using protocols that had been developed specifically to counter frequency manipulation threats. Unit 23. Request originated from neighbor at 1249 Riverside Drive. Authentication code Delta 779. Original call received at 23:41 hours. Chen verified the authentication code through his computer system and confirmed that the call had been properly logged with consistent timestamps. The dispatcher's voice patterns matched the biometric profiles stored in the new security system. Everything appeared legitimate, but Chen's experience had taught him never to rely on a single verification method. He contacted Detective Hawkins, now heading the state's Communications Security Task Force, through his encrypted backup radio. "Lisa, this is Marcus. I'm responding to a welfare check at 1247 Riverside Drive, the same address where this all started 5 years ago. Could be a coincidence, but I wanted you to be aware. Copy that, Marcus. We're monitoring your communications through multiple channels. Everything looks clean from our end, but we'll maintain overwatch until you clear the scene. As Chen drove toward Riverside Drive, he reflected on how fundamentally his world had changed since that first encounter with electronic deception. What had once been a straightforward job, responding to calls, helping citizens, enforcing laws, had become a complex exercise in verification and counter-surveillance. The Millbrook Police Department now employed 2 full-time communications security specialists, had implemented multiple redundant verification systems, and maintained constant liaison with federal agencies monitoring for electronic warfare threats. The cost of defending against sophisticated technological manipulation had transformed policing in ways that would have been unimaginable a decade earlier. The house at 1247 Riverside Drive looked exactly as it had 5 years earlier. A modest 2-story colonial with a well-maintained yard and security lighting. But this time, there was actually a reason for police presence. Mrs. Morrison answered the door in a bathrobe, clearly worried about her elderly neighbor who lived alone in the adjacent house. "Officer, thank you for coming," she said. "We haven't seen Harold for 3 days, and his newspapers are piling up. He usually walks his dog every morning, but the dog has been barking constantly from inside the house." Chen conducted the welfare check professionally and thoroughly, discovering that Harold Peterson, an 82-year-old retired engineer, had fallen in his bathroom and been unable to reach his phone for help. Emergency medical services were summoned, and Peterson was treated for dehydration and a minor injury, but he would recover fully. As Chen completed his paperwork, he realized that this call had been entirely legitimate, a genuine emergency where his response had actually helped someone in need. The irony wasn't lost on him that the address where he had first encountered sophisticated deception had now been the site of exactly the kind of authentic police work that the frequency walkers had tried to prevent. But the coincidence also served as a reminder that the threats he had helped expose were still active. Federal investigations continued to uncover new networks using advanced technology to manipulate law enforcement communications. The frequency walkers had been just the beginning of a technological arms race that showed no signs of ending. Chen's radio crackled with a new transmission as he prepared to return to patrol. Unit 23, respond to 842 Pine Street. Report of suspicious activity, possible break-in in progress. He listened carefully to the dispatcher's voice, analyzing patterns and checking authentication protocols automatically. Legitimate call, proper verification, consistent with normal dispatch procedures. But Chen also activated his backup communication systems and notified Detective Hawkins of his new assignment before responding. Unit 23, copy, en route to Pine Street. ETA 4 minutes. As he drove through the quiet streets of Millbrook, Chen understood that he would never again take a radio call at the face value. The price of his experience with the frequency walkers was permanent vigilance, constant verification, and the knowledge that the most dangerous threats often came disguised as routine police work. But he also understood that his vigilance served a larger purpose. Somewhere in the electromagnetic spectrum, in the spaces between legitimate communications, new forms of electronic deception were being developed and tested. When they emerged from the digital shadows, officers like Chen would be ready to detect the subtle discordances that revealed their presence. The frequency war continued, fought with increasingly sophisticated weapons on both sides. Chen had learned to navigate that electronic battlefield, to distinguish between authentic and synthetic communication, to guard the fragile boundaries where truth still existed in an age of perfect technological deception. His radio remained quiet as he approached Pine Street, where he would soon discover that sometimes, even in a world of electronic warfare and technological manipulation, police work still involved helping real people with genuine problems. The challenge was learning to tell the difference, one transmission at a time. As Chen's patrol car disappeared into the maze of residential streets, the night settled back into its normal rhythm. But in communication centers and monitoring stations across the region, vigilant officers continued their electronic watch, listening for the subtle signs that might herald the next evolution in the ongoing war for authentic communication. The frequency walkers had taught them that in the digital age, the most dangerous enemies weren't always the ones you could see. Sometimes they were the voices that sounded exactly like the people you trusted most. 10 years had passed since Officer Marcus Chen first heard his own voice responding to a call he'd never acknowledged, but the memories remained vivid as he prepared for his final shift before retirement. Now, Captain Chen, he had spent the last decade of his career building and leading the Communications Security Division, a specialized unit that existed solely because of the threats he had helped expose. The Millbrook Police Department's Communications Center bore little resemblance to the simple radio dispatch system that the frequency walkers had once exploited so effectively. Banks of computers monitored voice patterns in real time, artificial intelligence systems analyzed communication anomalies, and multiple verification protocols ensured that every transmission could be authenticated through independent channels. The trust and cooperation that makes law enforcement possible could also be our greatest vulnerability when weaponized against us. The young officers listened intently, many of them born into a world where electronic deception was a known threat rather than an unimaginable surprise. They would never experience the innocence that Chen's generation had lost, the ability to trust radio communications without question, to assume that familiar voices belonged to familiar people. Your job, Chen continued, is to maintain that balance between necessary trust and appropriate suspicion, to keep the channels of communication open while guarding against those who would corrupt them. It's not just about protecting radio frequencies or preventing voice synthesis. It's about preserving the integrity of information itself. As Chen left the police station for the last time as an active officer, he reflected on how the frequency walker incident had changed not just his career, but law enforcement itself. The conspiracy had been exposed and its primary actors prosecuted, but the technology and techniques they had pioneered continued to evolve and spread. New threats emerged regularly: deepfake video calls from fake supervisors, AI-generated text messages that perfectly mimicked individual writing styles, even synthetic biometric data that could fool fingerprint and facial recognition systems. Each advance in defensive technology was matched by corresponding improvements in offensive capabilities. But Chen had also seen positive changes emerge from the crisis. Law enforcement agencies had become more sophisticated in their approach to information security, more aware of psychological manipulation techniques, and more resilient in the face of technological threats. The frequency walker incident had been a wake-up call that had ultimately strengthened the institutions it had initially threatened. His personal phone buzzed with a text message as he drove home. "Congratulations on your retirement, Captain. Your vigilance over the years has saved more lives than you'll ever know." The watch continues. Detective Hawkins Chen smiled, knowing that the Communications Security Task Force would continue its work under Hawkins' leadership, adapting to new threats and developing countermeasures against technologies that hadn't even been invented yet. As he pulled into his driveway, Chen's radio scanner, a habit he'd never quite been able to break, picked up normal police communications from across the region. Routine traffic stops, minor accidents, domestic disturbances, all the ordinary work of law enforcement conducted through secure, authenticated channels. But somewhere in the electromagnetic spectrum, Chen knew, the next generation of frequency walkers was probably testing new techniques, probing for vulnerabilities, preparing for operations that would push the boundaries of electronic deception even further. The war for authentic communication would continue long after his retirement, fought by officers who had learned from his experience and would face threats he couldn't imagine. But they would be ready, trained to listen for the subtle discordances that revealed deception, prepared to guard the spaces where truth still lived in an increasingly synthetic world. Chen's final entry in his duty log, written that evening in his home office, reflected on the journey that had begun with a simple radio anomaly on a quiet October night. The frequency walkers showed us that, in the digital age, reality itself could be weaponized through the corruption of communication. But they also showed us that human awareness, properly trained and appropriately vigilant, could detect even the most sophisticated deceptions. The technology will continue to evolve, but so will our ability to distinguish between authentic and synthetic, between truth and manipulation. The watch continues, one transmission at a time. Outside his window, the night was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and the occasional radio transmission from passing police patrols. Normal sounds of a community protected by officers who had learned to guard not just against traditional crimes, but against the invisible threats that traveled through the airwaves. Voices that didn't belong to the people claiming to speak. Frequencies that carried deception instead of truth. Chen turned off his scanner and settled into his retirement, but he kept his phone nearby, ready to respond if the next evolution of electronic warfare required the experience of someone who had learned to hear the silence between the words, the spaces where authenticity still lived in a world of perfect synthetic speech. The frequency walkers had taught him that in the modern world, the most important battles weren't always fought with weapons or violence, but with trust and verification, authenticity and deception. And in that ongoing war, eternal vigilance remained the price of truth itself. The 911 Emergency Communications Center of Riverside County, California, buzzed with quiet efficiency at 2:17 a.m. on a Thursday in March 2019. Senior dispatcher Angela Martinez had been working the graveyard shift for 8 years, long enough to recognize the rhythm of late-night emergencies, domestic disturbances fueled by alcohol, medical crises among the elderly, the occasional traffic accident on the winding mountain roads that snaked through the county's rural areas. But tonight felt different. The calls were coming in at an unusual pace, and each one carried a subtle wrongness that Martinez couldn't quite identify. Her workstation, equipped with state-of-the-art computer-aided dispatch software, multiple phone lines, and radio systems connecting her to patrol units across the county's 7,200 square miles, displayed a steady stream of incident reports that should have felt routine, but somehow didn't. Martinez had processed over 50,000 emergency calls during her career, developing the kind of intuitive sense that veteran dispatchers called the voice, the ability to hear beneath the words to identify genuine emergencies, distinguish between real crises and false alarms, and recognize the subtle vocal cues that indicated when callers weren't telling the complete truth. Tonight, that intuitive sense was screaming warning she couldn't rationalize. The first anomaly had occurred at 11:43 p.m., a domestic disturbance call from 1428 Maple Ridge Road, a rural address in the mountain foothills where cellular coverage was spotty and landline phones were still common. The caller, identifying herself as Patricia Holcomb, reported that her husband was threatening her with a knife and had been drinking heavily. "Ma'am, are you in immediate danger right now?" Martinez had asked, following established protocols while simultaneously dispatching Deputy Sheriff Michael Torres to the location. "He's in the garage, but he said he's coming back with the knife. Please hurry. I'm scared he's going to hurt me." The call had lasted 6 minutes, with Martinez providing safety instructions while keeping the caller on the line until Torres arrived at the scene. But when Torres radioed back, his report was puzzling. "Dispatch, I'm at 1428 Maple Ridge. No one's home. House is dark, vehicles gone, no signs of disturbance. Neighbors say the Holcombs left 3 days ago for a vacation in Arizona." Martinez had double-checked the call logs, the phone number, even the address verification system. Everything indicated that Patricia Holcomb had called from her home phone at 1428 Maple Ridge Road. But according to Torres and the neighbors, no one had been there for days. The second anomaly came 47 minutes later. A medical emergency at Riverside Memorial Hospital. The caller identified himself as Dr. Robert Chen, reporting a mass casualty incident in the emergency department with multiple gunshot victims requiring immediate police response. Martinez had immediately escalated the call, dispatching all available units and notifying supervisors of the active shooter situation. But when the first deputies arrived at the hospital, they found a normal Thursday night in the emergency department. 2 patients with minor injuries, no shooting, no mass casualties, and no Dr. Robert Chen on the medical staff. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Walsh at Riverside Memorial. Everything's normal here. No shooting, no casualties. Hospital security confirms they have no doctor. Chen on staff and no one called 911 from this location tonight." By 2 a.m., Martinez had fielded 4 more calls that followed the same pattern. Detailed, convincing emergency reports that resulted in deputies responding to locations where no emergencies existed. Each caller had provided specific names, addresses, and circumstances that seemed legitimate until officers arrived to find the situations completely fabricated. Martinez's supervisor, Communications Sergeant David Park, had been monitoring the unusual call pattern from his office overlooking the dispatch center. At 2:15 a.m., he approached Martinez's workstation with a concerned expression. "Angela, I've been reviewing tonight's call logs. We've had 6 false reports in the past 2.5 hours, all requiring significant resource deployment. That's unusual even for a full moon weekend." "Sergeant, these weren't typical false reports," Martinez replied, pulling up the recorded calls on her computer. The callers provided specific details, knew the addresses, used appropriate terminology. They sounded genuinely distressed. If I didn't know the outcomes, I'd swear these were legitimate emergencies. Park listened to portions of the recorded calls, his expression growing more troubled with each playback. The voice patterns are consistent with genuine stress responses. These people weren't obviously lying or prank calling. But 6 false reports in one night from different locations across the county. Martinez had been thinking about the same pattern. "Sergeant, what if they weren't false reports? What if someone wanted our deputies responding to those specific locations at those specific times? What if the fake emergencies were diversions?" The implication was chilling. If someone was systematically creating false emergency calls to manipulate police deployment patterns, real crimes could be occurring in areas where deputies had been drawn away by fictitious crises. Park immediately initiated a comprehensive review of all crime reports for the evening, cross-referencing them with the timeline of false emergency calls. What they discovered confirmed Martinez's worst fears. During the window, when Deputy Torres was responding to the fake domestic disturbance on Maple Ridge Road, a convenience store robbery had occurred 12 miles away in his normal patrol sector. While multiple units were responding to the fabricated hospital shooting, 2 residential burglaries had been reported in areas that would normally have had immediate police coverage. "Someone's gaming our system," Park concluded grimly. "They're using false emergency calls to create predictable police response patterns, leaving other areas vulnerable to actual crimes." But the technical aspects of the deception troubled Martinez even more than the strategic implications. Sergeant, how did they know enough to use the right names, addresses, and phone numbers? Patricia Holcomb isn't a common name, and 1428 Maple Ridge Road is pretty remote. Someone did their homework. Park pulled up additional databases, checking property records and phone listings. Patricia and James Holcomb were indeed the registered owners of 1428 Maple Ridge Road. Their landline phone number matched the one logged in the 911 system. Dr. Robert Chen was a real physician, though he worked at a different hospital in San Diego. They're using real names and real information, Park realized. Someone has access to detailed databases, property records, phone directories, professional licensing information. This isn't random. It's targeted and well-researched. Martinez felt a chill as she considered the level of preparation required for such a sophisticated operation. They would need to know our response protocols, our coverage areas, our typical deployment patterns, and they'd need current information about who's home, who's traveling, who's available to take phone calls at specific addresses. As if summoned by their conversation, Martinez's phone rang with another incoming 911 call. The caller ID showed a number she recognized, the landline for Riverdale Elementary School, located in a rural area about 20 minutes from the nearest deputy's location. 911, what's your emergency? This is Principal Sarah Williams at Riverdale Elementary School. We have an armed intruder in the building. I'm locked in my office with 3 teachers. He's in the hallway outside and I can hear him trying classroom doors. Please send help immediately. Martinez's training kicked in automatically, but her newly heightened awareness noted details that might normally pass unnoticed. The caller's voice was steady, despite reporting a life-threatening situation. The background was completely silent. No sounds of an intruder, no panicked voices, none of the ambient noise typically present during genuine crisis calls. Ma'am, can you describe the intruder? How did he gain access to the building? He's a white male, maybe in his 30s, wearing dark clothing. He broke a window in the back of the school. Please hurry. I think he has a gun. Martinez was dispatching units while simultaneously running checks on the school's information. Riverdale Elementary School was closed for spring break. Had been closed all week according to the school district's calendar. Principal Sarah Williams was a real person, but according to the school's website, she was attending an education conference in Denver through Friday. Ma'am, I need you to stay on the line with me. Help is on the way. Can you tell me exactly where you are in the building? I'm in the main office, first door on the right when you enter the front entrance. Please tell the officers to be careful. I think he's armed and dangerous. Martinez made a critical decision that violated standard emergency protocols. Instead of keeping the caller on the line and dispatching all available units to an active shooter situation, she placed the call on hold and immediately contacted Sergeant Park. Sergeant, I have another one. Armed intruder at Riverdale Elementary, but the school's closed for spring break and the principal who's supposedly calling is at a conference in Denver. Park's response was immediate. Don't dispatch units to that location. This is the 7th fake call tonight, and now they're escalating to active shooter scenarios. We need to figure out who's doing this and why before someone gets hurt. But Martinez's decision created a terrible dilemma. If the call was genuine, if somehow Principal Williams had returned early from her conference and was actually trapped in the school with an armed intruder, her failure to dispatch immediate assistance could result in casualties. If the call was fake, dispatching units would continue the pattern of resource manipulation that had already enabled multiple crimes across the county. Sergeant, what if I'm wrong? What if this is the one real call mixed in with all the fake ones? Park's expression reflected the same terrible uncertainty. "Angela, trust your instincts. What does your experience tell you about this call?" Martinez listened to the caller again, still on hold, claiming to be trapped in a school office with an armed intruder just outside. The voice was too calm, the background too quiet, the timing too convenient following the pattern of previous false reports. "It's fake," she decided. "But I need to know how they're doing this and who's behind it before they escalate to something worse." What neither Martinez nor Park could have known was that their decision not to respond to the fake school shooting had just prevented the most sophisticated law enforcement manipulation they would ever encounter. 20 miles away, a team of armed robbers had been waiting for the police response to the elementary school to clear the area around Riverside Community Bank, where they had planned to execute a coordinated heist during the confusion. But the absence of police sirens racing toward the school had forced them to abort their operation, leaving behind evidence that would eventually help unravel a conspiracy that reached far beyond simple emergency call manipulation. Sergeant Park's decision to investigate the false emergency calls, rather than simply responding to them, marked the beginning of an investigation that would expose vulnerabilities in the 911 system that no one had previously considered. Working through the remainder of their shift, Martinez and Park began systematically analyzing the technical aspects of the calls that had plagued their evening. The first breakthrough came from examining the phone numbers used for each false report. While the numbers were legitimate and matched the addresses given by callers, closer inspection revealed something unusual in the call routing data. "Angela, look at this," Park said, pointing to technical information displayed on Martinez's computer screen. "These calls are showing as coming from landline numbers, but the routing data indicates they were processed through voice-over Internet protocol systems before reaching our 911 center." Martinez studied the technical details, her understanding growing as Park explained the implications. Someone's spoofing landline numbers using Internet-based phone services. They can make it appear that calls are originating from any number they choose, even if they're calling from completely different locations. The technology was legal and widely available, commonly used by businesses to display local numbers when calling customers from centralized call centers. But in the hands of sophisticated criminals, it became a tool for creating convincing false emergencies that appeared to originate from legitimate locations. But that still doesn't explain how they knew which names to use, which houses would be empty, which people would be out of town, Martinez pointed out. The level of current information they had suggests ongoing surveillance or access to real-time data sources. Park had been thinking about the same problem. What if they're accessing multiple databases and cross-referencing information? Property records for names and addresses, travel websites for vacation bookings, social media for people posting about trips or conferences. The possibility was disturbing, but technically feasible. With enough automation and data processing capability, someone could systematically identify targets for false emergency calls, people who were away from home, traveling, or otherwise unable to contradict fake reports made in their names. At 6 a.m., as their shift neared its end, Martinez received a call that would provide the key to understanding the full scope of the operation. 911, what's your emergency? This is Officer Jennifer Walsh with the California Highway Patrol. I need immediate backup for a high-speed pursuit eastbound on Interstate 10, approaching the Riverside County line. Suspect is driving a stolen red pickup truck, armed and dangerous. Martinez's training and experience immediately identified multiple problems with the call. Officer Walsh's voice was too composed for someone engaged in a high-speed pursuit. There was no background noise of sirens, wind, or radio traffic that would be present in a patrol car during a chase. Most importantly, CHP protocol required officers to coordinate pursuits through their own dispatch system, not through local 911 centers. Officer Walsh, can you provide your badge number and unit identification? Badge 4471, Unit 23. Suspect is now crossing into Riverside County jurisdiction. I need local units to establish a roadblock at the Highway 74 interchange. Martinez quickly verified that Officer Jennifer Walsh, Badge 4471, was a real CHP officer assigned to the region. But when she contacted CHP Dispatch directly to confirm the pursuit, she learned that Officer Walsh was off duty and at home in San Diego, 60 miles away. "This is getting sophisticated," Park observed, listening to the call. "They're not just using civilian identities anymore. They're impersonating police officers and using real badge numbers and unit information." The fake CHP pursuit call would have drawn multiple sheriff's deputies away from their patrol areas to establish roadblocks and coordinate with highway patrol units. The level of law enforcement knowledge required to construct such a convincing scenario suggested that whoever was behind the operation had detailed understanding of police procedures and interagency coordination protocols. Martinez made another critical decision, refusing to dispatch units for the fake pursuit while simultaneously alerting CHP to the impersonation of their officer. The decision proved correct when CHP confirmed that no pursuits were active in their jurisdiction and Officer Walsh was verified to be at home. But the incident raised alarming questions about the scope of the conspiracy. If someone could convincingly impersonate police officers and access law enforcement databases for badge numbers and unit assignments, the threat extended far beyond simple emergency call manipulation. "Sergeant, we need to contact the FBI," Martinez said, reviewing the night's call logs. "This isn't just local crime anymore. Someone's systematically compromising emergency response systems and impersonating law enforcement officers across jurisdictional boundaries." Park agreed, but he also recognized that documenting the threat would require evidence that might be difficult to obtain. "The problem is that we prevented most of the responses tonight. We don't have proof of what crimes might have been committed while we were dealing with fake emergencies." The answer came from an unexpected source. At 6:15 a.m., Martinez received a legitimate 911 call from the manager of Riverside Community Bank, reporting evidence of an attempted robbery that had been interrupted before completion. "Someone broke into our bank last night, disabled our alarm system, and was working on the vault when something spooked them. They left behind equipment and tools, but no money was taken. It's like they just suddenly abandoned the operation." The timeline matched perfectly with the fake elementary school shooting call that Martinez had refused to dispatch units to respond to. The bank robbery had been planned to coincide with police resources being diverted to a non-existent active shooter situation. "They're not just creating diversions," Martinez realized. "They're coordinating complex operations that require precise timing and detailed knowledge of police response patterns." Evidence recovered from the bank included sophisticated electronic equipment designed to bypass security systems, communications gear for coordinating multiple team members, and, most importantly, printed schedules showing Riverside County Sheriff's Department patrol routes and shift assignments. "Someone's been studying our operations," Park concluded, after reviewing the materials with FBI agents who arrived to investigate. "They know our procedures, our response times, our coverage areas. This is intelligence-driven crime at a level we've never encountered." The FBI's investigation would eventually reveal that the false emergency call operation was part of a larger criminal network that had been systematically studying law enforcement agencies across multiple states, identifying vulnerabilities in 911 systems, and developing techniques for manipulating emergency response resources. But for Martinez, the most disturbing aspect of the conspiracy was how easily the 911 system could be exploited by someone with technical knowledge and sufficient preparation. The trust-based nature of emergency communications, the assumption that people calling for help were genuine, had been weaponized against the very system designed to protect the public. The scariest part, Martinez told FBI investigators, is how convincing the fake calls were. If I hadn't started questioning the pattern, if I hadn't trusted my instincts over the protocols, we would have kept responding to false emergencies while real crimes happened in the blind spots they were creating. The investigation also revealed that Martinez's decision to break protocol by not responding to obvious emergency calls had been the crucial factor in disrupting the conspiracy. Her willingness to trust her experience over established procedures had prevented what could have been a coordinated series of major crimes across the county. The FBI's investigation into the false emergency call network, led by Special Agent Rebecca Kowalski, uncovered a conspiracy that reached far beyond Riverside County. Within 72 hours of Martinez's initial report, federal agents had identified similar operations in 6 other states, all using identical techniques and apparently coordinated by a central command structure. Agent Kowalski briefed Martinez and Sergeant Park at the FBI's Los Angeles field office, presenting evidence that revealed the true scope of what they had discovered. Your dispatcher's instincts prevented what we believe was a test run for a much larger operation, Kowalski explained, displaying a map marked with incidents across the western United States. We've documented similar false emergency call patterns in Nevada, Arizona, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, and Utah. In most cases, local law enforcement agencies didn't recognize the manipulation until after crimes had been committed. The pattern was consistent across all locations. Sophisticated false emergency calls using spoofed phone numbers and real personal information, designed to draw police resources away from targeted areas where actual crimes were planned. The level of coordination required suggested a well-funded organization with access to extensive databases and technical resources. But what makes this operation particularly dangerous, Agent Kowalski continued, is the escalation pattern we're seeing. They started with simple diversions, fake domestic disturbances and medical calls. Then they moved to impersonating police officers and creating false active shooter scenarios. We believe they're building towards something much larger. Martinez felt a chill as she realized the implications. You're saying the bank robbery attempt was just practice? They're planning something bigger? We think the entire network has been testing law enforcement response capabilities, identifying weaknesses and developing techniques for large-scale manipulation of emergency services. The bank robbery was small-scale compared to what they might be preparing for. The technical analysis of the operation revealed sophisticated use of multiple technologies working in coordination. Voice over Internet protocol systems allowed calls to appear to originate from any number. Automated database searches provided real names and addresses. Social media monitoring identified people who were traveling or away from home. Even law enforcement databases had been compromised to obtain badge numbers and officer information. Whoever's running this has significant technical resources and inside knowledge of law enforcement operations, Agent Kowalski explained. But we've identified a pattern in their operational security that might give us an opening. The breakthrough came from analyzing the timing and geographic distribution of false emergency calls across multiple jurisdictions. Despite appearing random, the calls followed subtle patterns that suggested coordination from a central location using standardized procedures and information sources. They're using a systematic approach, FBI technical specialist Dr. Marcus Thompson explained to the team. Database queries to identify targets, automated systems to generate false calls, and real-time coordination to time the calls with planned criminal activities. But that systematic approach creates digital footprints we can track. The investigation focused on identifying the command and control infrastructure that enabled such sophisticated coordination. The false emergency calls required real-time access to multiple databases, voice spoofing technology, and coordination between teams in different states. Resources that suggested either a well-funded criminal organization or possible foreign intelligence involvement. Martinez's role in the investigation evolved from victim to consultant, as federal agents recognized the value of her experience in identifying deceptive emergency calls. Her ability to detect subtle inconsistencies in caller behavior and voice patterns became crucial to the FBI's efforts to distinguish between genuine emergencies and sophisticated manipulation attempts. The problem we're facing, Martinez explained during a training session for federal agents, is that the technology for creating false emergency calls is getting better faster than our ability to detect deception. These weren't obvious prank calls or amateur attempts. They were professionally crafted scenarios designed to trigger immediate emergency response. The training program that emerged from Martinez's experience focused on developing new instincts for 911 dispatchers, teaching them to recognize subtle signs that might indicate manufactured emergencies. But the challenge was significant. Dispatch protocols were designed for rapid response, not extended verification processes that might delay assistance to genuine emergencies. Agent Kowalski's team eventually traced the network's operations to a sophisticated criminal organization based in Eastern Europe, using American accomplices to gather intelligence and coordinate operations. The false emergency call campaign was designed to test and map American law enforcement response capabilities as preparation for larger operations targeting critical infrastructure and government facilities. This wasn't just about robbing banks or creating diversions for ordinary crimes, Kowalski explained to Martinez during a briefing 4 months after the initial discovery. They were conducting intelligence gathering on American emergency response systems, looking for vulnerabilities that could be exploited during larger attacks. The implications were sobering. If foreign adversaries could systematically manipulate 911 systems and law enforcement dispatch, they could potentially create chaos during national emergencies, terrorist attacks, or military operations. The false emergency call network had exposed fundamental vulnerabilities in systems that formed the backbone of domestic security. Martinez's experience became the foundation for new 911 dispatch protocols implemented nationwide. Her ability to recognize deception and trust her instincts over established procedures had prevented what intelligence analysts believed could have been a catastrophic test of American emergency response vulnerabilities. What still bothers me, Martinez told Agent Kowalski months later, is how close they came to success. If I hadn't noticed the pattern, if I hadn't been willing to break protocol, they could have mapped our entire response system and used that information for something much worse than bank robbery. The investigation also revealed that Martinez's decision to investigate rather than simply respond had been monitored by the conspiracy's coordinators. Her actions had been identified as a threat to their operation, and plans had been developed to eliminate her involvement through various means, including false allegations of protocol violations and performance issues that would have resulted in her removal from dispatch duties. You were a bigger threat to their operation than they initially realized, Kowalski explained. Your instincts and experience represented exactly the kind of human factor they couldn't account for in their systematic approach to manipulating emergency services. The false emergency call network was eventually dismantled through coordinated international law enforcement operations, but the vulnerabilities it had exposed remained. The 911 system's fundamental reliance on trust, the assumption that people calling for help were genuine, continued to represent a potential weakness that could be exploited by sophisticated adversaries. For Martinez, the experience had permanently changed her approach to emergency dispatch work. The knowledge that every call might potentially be deception designed to manipulate police response had created a level of analytical thinking that was both professionally valuable and personally exhausting. 6 months after the false emergency call investigation concluded, Angela Martinez found herself struggling with the psychological aftermath of constant vigilance required by her enhanced role in the 911 system. Every call now required multiple levels of analysis: voice pattern recognition, background noise evaluation, caller verification, and cross-referencing with real-time databases to confirm the authenticity of reported emergencies. The Riverside County Emergency Communications Center had implemented new protocols based on Martinez's experience, creating verification procedures designed to detect sophisticated deception attempts. But the added layers of security had significantly increased the complexity of dispatch operations and the stress levels of personnel responsible for managing life-threatening emergencies. I used to be able to focus completely on helping people in crisis, Martinez explained to Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychologist specializing in first responder trauma. Now, I'm constantly analyzing whether the crisis is real or manufactured. It's exhausting to question everything while still trying to provide emergency assistance. The psychological toll was affecting Martinez's personal life as well. The knowledge that sophisticated adversaries could monitor personal information, track social media activity, and use intimate details to create convincing deceptions had made her increasingly suspicious of normal interactions and communications. Dr. Chen helped Martinez understand that her experience represented a form of technological trauma, the violation of trust in systems and communications that most people took for granted. You've seen behind the curtain of how information can be weaponized against people, Dr. Chen explained. That awareness is professionally valuable, but it can also create anxiety and hypervigilance that affects your daily life. The new dispatch protocols required Martinez to verify caller information through multiple databases, analyze voice patterns for signs of stress or deception, and cross-reference emergency reports with law enforcement intelligence systems. While effective at detecting sophisticated manipulation attempts, the procedures had significantly increased response times for all emergency calls. We're caught between two competing priorities, Sergeant Park explained during a staff meeting. We need to prevent false emergency calls that manipulate our response resources, but we also can't delay assistance to genuine emergencies. Finding the right balance requires experience and judgment that can't be easily systematized. Martinez had become the center's expert on deception detection, training other dispatchers to recognize subtle signs that might indicate false emergency reports. But transferring her intuitive skills to other personnel proved challenging. The ability to hear deception required experience and pattern recognition that developed over years of handling emergency calls. The training program Martinez developed focused on teaching dispatchers to identify inconsistencies in caller behavior, background noise that didn't match reported locations, and timing patterns that might suggest coordinated manipulation attempts. But the most important element was encouraging dispatchers to trust their instincts when something felt wrong about a call. The technology for creating false emergencies will keep getting better, Martinez told a class of new dispatch trainees. Our defense isn't just technical systems or verification protocols, it's human awareness and the willingness to question things that don't feel right, even when they appear legitimate on the surface. The false emergency call investigation had also revealed vulnerabilities in the 911 system that extended beyond technological manipulation. The conspiracy had exploited fundamental assumptions about emergency communications, that callers were genuine, that reported addresses were accurate, that people calling for help were actually in the locations they claimed. Agent Kowalski maintained contact with Martinez as part of ongoing federal monitoring for similar operations. "We've identified copycat networks trying to replicate the techniques you helped expose," Kowalski reported during a quarterly briefing. "Your protocols have prevented several attempted operations, but we're also seeing evolution in their methods. The new threats included deepfake audio technology that could synthesize specific individuals' voices, automated systems that could generate thousands of false emergency calls simultaneously, and social engineering techniques designed to manipulate dispatchers through psychological pressure rather than technological deception. They're adapting to our countermeasures," Martinez realized during one of her consultations with federal investigators. "Every defense we develop forces them to become more sophisticated, but it also makes their operations more complex and potentially more detectable. The arms race between emergency system security and sophisticated deception attempts had created a new specialty within law enforcement: communication security analysts who combined technical expertise with psychological understanding of deception detection." Martinez found herself at the center of this emerging field, helping develop protocols that were being adopted by 911 centers nationwide. But the personal cost of her expertise continued to accumulate. The constant analysis required to identify potential deception had changed her relationship with normal communication, making her suspicious of routine interactions that might have hidden motives or concealed information. "The hardest part," Martinez told Dr. Chen during one of their sessions, "is that I can never completely turn off the analysis. Even when I'm talking to friends or family, part of my mind is evaluating whether what they're telling me is authentic, or if there might be some hidden agenda." Dr. Chen helped Martinez develop techniques for compartmentalizing her professional vigilance, creating mental boundaries between work situations that required maximum suspicion and personal interactions that could be approached with normal trust. But the process was ongoing and required constant conscious effort. The federal investigation had also revealed that Martinez's identity and personal information had been compromised by the conspiracy, requiring ongoing security measures to protect her from potential retaliation. Her home address, family members, daily routines, and personal vulnerabilities had all been documented by the network as part of their intelligence gathering operations. "You represent a significant threat to anyone attempting similar operations," Agent Kowalski explained when discussing security protocols. "Your ability to detect deception and your willingness to act on suspicions makes you a high-value target for elimination or neutralization." The security measures included regular changes to personal information, enhanced monitoring of communications, and coordination with local law enforcement to maintain awareness of potential threats. But they also reinforced Martinez's sense of isolation and constant vigilance that affected every aspect of her daily life. Despite the personal challenges, Martinez remained committed to her role in protecting the integrity of emergency communication systems. Her experience had revealed vulnerabilities that could potentially affect millions of people who depended on 911 services during crises, and her expertise was crucial to developing defenses against increasingly sophisticated threats. "Someone has to stand guard," Martinez told herself during difficult moments when the stress seemed overwhelming. "If people can't trust that calling 911 will bring genuine help, if emergency services can be manipulated and weaponized, then the foundation of public safety starts to crumble." 18 months after the original false emergency call investigation, Martinez's expertise was called upon again when federal agents detected signs that a new network was attempting to exploit vulnerabilities in 911 systems using techniques that had evolved beyond the original conspiracy. Special Agent Rebecca Kowalski contacted Martinez directly, requesting her assistance with an investigation that had been triggered by unusual patterns detected in emergency communications across the Pacific Northwest. "We're seeing sophisticated false emergency calls again," Kowalski explained during a secure video conference from the FBI's Seattle field office. "But the techniques have evolved significantly since the network you helped expose. They're using artificial intelligence to generate realistic emergency scenarios and deepfake audio technology to create convincing caller voices." The new threat represented a quantum leap in sophistication compared to the original conspiracy. Instead of spoofing phone numbers and using research to impersonate real people, the new network was creating entirely synthetic emergencies with artificial voices that could convincingly portray any demographic or personality type. Martinez studied recordings of the new false emergency calls with growing concern. The artificial voices were virtually indistinguishable from human speech, complete with appropriate emotional responses, realistic background noise, and convincing details about emergency situations that never existed. How do we detect deception when the technology can create perfect synthetic voices and generate realistic emergency scenarios? Martinez asked, recognizing that her previous techniques for identifying false calls might be obsolete. "That's exactly why we need your expertise," Agent Kowalski replied. "You understand the human elements of emergency communication better than anyone. There might be patterns or inconsistencies that technology can't perfectly replicate, even with advanced artificial intelligence." The investigation revealed that the new network was targeting multiple cities simultaneously, creating coordinated false emergency campaigns designed to overwhelm dispatch centers and create widespread chaos in law enforcement response systems. Unlike the previous conspiracy's focus on specific criminal operations, this network appeared to be testing capabilities for large-scale disruption of emergency services. Martinez was assigned to work with a federal task force analyzing the synthetic emergency calls, applying her experience with deception detection to identify potential weaknesses in the artificial intelligence systems generating the false reports. Even the most sophisticated AI has limitations, Dr. Marcus Thompson, the FBI's technical specialist, explained to the task force. The artificial voices might be perfect, but the scenarios they generate might follow patterns or contain inconsistencies that human intuition can detect. Martinez began listening to hundreds of recorded false emergency calls, analyzing them for subtle signs that might indicate artificial generation. The process was mentally exhausting. Each call was a convincing portrayal of someone in genuine distress, but she knew that responding to them would waste resources and potentially enable real crimes. The breakthrough came when Martinez noticed that the artificial voices, while emotionally convincing, lacked certain subtle variations that characterized genuine human speech under stress. Real people in crisis situations demonstrated micro-pauses, breathing patterns, and vocal inconsistencies that reflected authentic physiological responses to danger. "The AI can simulate panic and fear," Martinez explained to the task force, "but it's too consistent. Real people in emergencies have more variation in their speech patterns. They stumble, repeat themselves, lose track of details when they're genuinely scared. The synthetic voices are emotionally accurate, but linguistically too perfect." This insight led to the development of new analytical software that could identify artificial speech by detecting the absence of natural human inconsistencies, rather than looking for obvious technical artifacts. The system analyzed micropatterns in speech timing, breathing, and linguistic variation that were difficult for AI to perfectly replicate. But the new network had also evolved its operational security, using techniques that made it much harder to trace the source of false emergency calls. Instead of using identifiable internet-based phone systems, they were hijacking legitimate cellular networks and routing calls through compromised infrastructure that obscured their origins. They're not just using better technology to create false emergencies, Agent Kowalski explained. They're using more sophisticated methods to hide their tracks and avoid detection by law enforcement agencies. The investigation revealed that the new network was likely state-sponsored, representing a foreign intelligence operation designed to test and potentially disrupt American emergency response capabilities during a crisis or military conflict. The sophistication of their technology and the scale of their operations suggested resources beyond typical criminal organizations. Martinez's role in the investigation expanded as federal agencies recognized that her expertise in human communication patterns was crucial to identifying artificial intelligence-generated deception. She worked with technical teams to develop detection algorithms based on her intuitive understanding of authentic emergency communication. The technology war is escalating, Martinez observed during a briefing with national security officials. Every defensive measure we develop prompts them to create more sophisticated offensive capabilities. But they're still trying to replicate human behavior, and humans have inconsistencies and patterns that might be impossible to perfectly synthesize. The new protocols that emerged from Martinez's work focused on analyzing the subtle human elements of emergency communication that were difficult for artificial intelligence to replicate. Dispatchers were trained to listen for natural speech patterns, authentic emotional responses, and realistic background details that characterized genuine emergencies. But the arms race between emergency system security and artificial intelligence-based deception continued to escalate. As detection methods improved, the technology for creating false emergencies became more sophisticated, requiring constant adaptation and evolution of defensive measures. We're fighting a war for the integrity of human communication itself, Martinez told Dr. Chen during one of their sessions. Every time someone calls 911, we have to determine not just whether they need help, but whether they're actually human. It's a level of reality verification that humanity has never had to deal with before. The investigation also revealed that Martinez's identity had again been compromised, this time by the new network that had identified her as a key threat to their operations. Enhanced security measures were implemented to protect her from potential retaliation, but the psychological impact of being permanently targeted reinforced her sense of isolation and constant vigilance. Despite the personal challenges, Martinez remained committed to defending the integrity of emergency communication systems against increasingly sophisticated threats. Her expertise had become crucial to national security efforts to protect critical infrastructure from foreign manipulation and domestic terrorism. 2 years after her initial encounter with false emergency calls, Martinez found herself at the center of a crisis that would test every lesson learned from previous investigations. On a Friday evening in November 2021, multiple 911 centers across California began receiving what appeared to be coordinated terrorist attacks, simultaneous reports of active shooters, bomb threats, and mass casualty incidents at schools, shopping centers, and government buildings throughout the state. The scale was unprecedented. Over 200 emergency calls in the span of 30 minutes, all reporting different but equally urgent situations requiring immediate law enforcement response. Every major population center from San Diego to San Francisco was affected, creating a statewide emergency that threatened to overwhelm the entire California law enforcement system. Martinez was working her regular shift when the crisis began, but within minutes she recognized patterns that triggered every alarm her experience had taught her to watch for. "This is the big one," she told Sergeant Park, as emergency calls flooded their dispatch center. Everything we've learned about false emergency manipulation, they're using it all simultaneously. The calls demonstrated the full evolution of artificial intelligence-based deception technology. Synthetic voices that perfectly replicated different age groups, ethnicities, and emotional states reported detailed emergency scenarios with convincing background noise and realistic geographic information. Each call appeared to come from legitimate phone numbers associated with the reported locations. But Martinez's trained ear detected the subtle inconsistencies that revealed the artificial nature of the communications. The emotional responses were too uniform, the background details too perfect, the timing too precisely coordinated to represent genuine chaos and panic. "Sergeant, none of these calls are real," Martinez announced, making a decision that violated every emergency response protocol and could potentially cost lives if she was wrong. This is a massive false emergency campaign designed to create statewide chaos. Park faced an impossible choice: respond to what appeared to be multiple terrorist attacks across California, or trust Martinez's assessment that all 200-plus emergency calls were sophisticated deceptions. The wrong decision could result in either catastrophic resource misallocation or failure to respond to genuine mass casualty events. "Angela, if you're wrong about this, we're talking about potential hundreds of casualties," Park said, his voice tight with stress. "But if you're right, and we respond to all these fake emergencies, we'll have no resources available for real crimes or actual emergencies." Martinez's analysis of the calls revealed coordination patterns that confirmed her assessment. Despite appearing to come from different locations and involve different scenarios, the emergency calls followed subtle timing sequences and linguistic patterns that suggested automated generation from a central source. The AI is sophisticated, but it's still following programmed parameters, Martinez explained to Park, while emergency calls continued flooding their system. "The voices are different, but the underlying scenario structures are too similar. Real emergencies don't happen with this kind of coordination and timing." Park made the critical decision to trust Martinez's expertise, implementing emergency protocols that treated the entire event as a coordinated false emergency campaign rather than genuine terrorist attacks. Instead of dispatching resources to the reported locations, he contacted federal authorities and activated communication security measures designed to counter sophisticated deception operations. The decision proved correct when FBI technical analysis confirmed that all 200-plus emergency calls had been generated by artificial intelligence systems using hijacked communication networks. The operation was traced to a foreign intelligence service conducting a large-scale test of their capability to disrupt American emergency response systems during a crisis. "You prevented what could have been a complete collapse of emergency services across California," Agent Kowalski told Martinez during the post-incident briefing. If law enforcement had responded to all those false reports, real emergencies would have gone unanswered, and the state's entire public safety infrastructure would have been paralyzed. The investigation revealed that the massive false emergency campaign had been timed to coincide with planned criminal operations across the state. While law enforcement resources were supposed to be chasing artificial crises, coordinated robberies, kidnappings, and cyber attacks were scheduled to occur in areas left unprotected by diverted police response. Martinez's decision to recognize and resist the deception had prevented not just resource misallocation, but a coordinated criminal campaign that could have resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars in losses and potentially numerous casualties from crimes enabled by the absence of police protection. "The human factor remains our strongest defense," Martinez observed during congressional testimony about the incident. "Artificial intelligence can create perfect synthetic voices and realistic emergency scenarios, but human intuition can still detect patterns and inconsistencies that reveal deception. Technology alone isn't enough. We need experienced professionals who understand authentic human communication. The California incident led to nationwide implementation of emergency communication security protocols based on Martinez's expertise. Her ability to detect artificial intelligence-generated deception became the foundation for training programs implemented in 911 centers across the country. But the psychological toll of serving as the last line of defense against increasingly sophisticated deception campaigns continued to affect Martinez's personal well-being. The knowledge that her decisions could affect the safety of millions of people created pressure that was difficult to manage alongside normal personal relationships and daily life. Dr. Chen helped Martinez understand that her role had evolved beyond typical emergency dispatch work into something resembling national security intelligence analysis. "You're not just answering emergency calls anymore," Dr. Chen explained. "You're defending the integrity of information itself in a world where reality can be artificially manufactured." The success of Martinez's detection of the California false emergency campaign led to her recruitment by the Department of Homeland Security to develop a national program for training emergency dispatchers to recognize and counter sophisticated deception operations. Working with federal agencies, Martinez helped create what became known as the human algorithm, a training system that taught dispatchers to use intuitive pattern recognition and emotional intelligence to detect artificial intelligence-generated deception that might fool technical security measures. "Machines are getting better at imitating human communication," Martinez explained to a gathering of emergency services professionals from across the country. "But they're still machines. They follow patterns, use algorithms, and operate within programmed parameters. Human intuition, properly trained, can detect the artificial patterns that even sophisticated AI can't completely eliminate." The training program focused on developing heightened awareness of authentic human communication patterns, the subtle inconsistencies, emotional variations, and unpredictable elements that characterized genuine emergency calls. Dispatchers learned to trust their instincts when something felt wrong about a call, even if technical analysis suggested it was legitimate. Martinez's expertise had revealed that the most advanced artificial intelligence systems could replicate human speech, emotional responses, and even background environmental sounds with near-perfect accuracy. But they struggled to recreate the chaotic, unpredictable nature of authentic human behavior during genuine emergencies. "Real people in crisis don't follow scripts," Martinez taught her students. "They contradict themselves, forget details, get distracted by things happening around them. AI-generated emergencies are too coherent, too focused, too perfectly structured to represent genuine panic and confusion." The Human Algorithm Training Program was implemented in over 3,000 emergency dispatch centers nationwide, creating a network of professionally trained human sensors capable of detecting sophisticated deception attempts that might overwhelm or fool automated security systems. But the program also revealed the psychological challenges facing emergency services personnel in an era of persistent technological deception. Dispatchers reported increased stress levels, anxiety about making wrong decisions, and difficulty maintaining trust in normal human communication outside of work environments. "We're asking people to maintain perfect vigilance while still providing compassionate emergency assistance," Dr. Chen observed during her work with Martinez and other dispatch professionals. The cognitive load of constantly analyzing every call for potential deception while trying to help people in genuine crisis is enormous. Martinez worked with mental health professionals to develop support systems for dispatchers dealing with the psychological impacts of constant deception detection. The program included regular counseling, stress management techniques, and methods for maintaining healthy skepticism without developing paranoia or cynicism. The National Implementation of Deception Detection Training also created new challenges for Emergency Services Administration. Response times increased as dispatchers spent more time verifying calls, and some genuine emergencies experienced delays while authentication procedures were completed. "We're balancing security against speed," Martinez explained during a national conference on emergency services. "Every second we spend verifying a call is a second that someone in genuine danger might not receive help. But if we don't verify calls, we risk having our entire response system manipulated by sophisticated adversaries." The solution involved developing rapid verification techniques that could distinguish between genuine and artificial emergencies within seconds rather than minutes. Martinez's expertise in recognizing authentic human communication patterns became the foundation for streamlined procedures that maintained security without significantly delaying emergency response. Federal intelligence agencies also began recruiting experienced 911 dispatchers for national security positions, recognizing that their skills in human communication analysis were valuable for detecting deception in other contexts beyond emergency services. The ability to hear truth in someone's voice, to detect when they're hiding something or not telling the complete story, that's intelligence work, Agent Kowalski explained to Martinez when offering her a position with a federal task force. "Your expertise with emergency communications translates directly to national security applications." Martinez faced a career decision that would take her away from direct emergency services work, but could expand her impact on protecting communication systems from sophisticated manipulation. The choice represented the evolution of her expertise from local emergency dispatch to national security intelligence analysis. "I became a 911 dispatcher to help people in crisis," Martinez reflected during discussions about her career path. "Now I'm being asked to help protect the entire system that people depend on for help. It's a larger mission, but it's also farther removed from the direct human contact that originally motivated me." The decision was complicated by ongoing security concerns related to her high-profile role in exposing deception networks. Federal agencies warned that her expertise and knowledge made her a permanent target for elimination or neutralization by hostile actors seeking to degrade American emergency response capabilities. Enhanced security measures had become a permanent feature of Martinez's life, affecting her personal relationships, housing arrangements, and daily routines. The price of expertise in detecting deception was constant vigilance against threats to her own safety and the safety of people close to her. "Sometimes I wonder if it would have been better to just follow protocols and respond to those first fake calls," Martinez told Dr. Chen during one of their sessions. "My life was simpler when I was just a dispatcher trying to help people. Now, I'm a target carrying knowledge that makes me valuable to some people and dangerous to others." Dr. Chen helped Martinez understand that her expertise represented a form of specialized knowledge that was crucial to national security, but carried personal costs that were difficult for others to understand. "You've become a guardian of truth in an era when truth itself can be manufactured and weaponized," Dr. Chen explained. "That's a burden that few people are equipped to carry." Martinez's transition to federal service brought her into a world of electronic warfare and information operations that operated far beyond the scope of emergency services, but relied on the same fundamental principles of human communication and deception detection that she had mastered. Working with the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, Martinez discovered that false emergency calls were just one application of a broader campaign to undermine trust in American communication systems and institutions. "The goal isn't just to create specific diversions or enable particular crimes," explained Dr. Rebecca Walsh, the Federal Program Director for Information Security. The strategic objective is to erode public confidence in emergency services, law enforcement, and government institutions generally. If people can't trust that calling 911 will bring genuine help, social cohesion starts to break down. Martinez's new role involved analyzing communication patterns across multiple sectors, not just emergency services, but also government agencies, financial institutions, healthcare systems, and critical infrastructure operators. Her expertise in human communication authenticity was applied to detecting deception campaigns targeting various aspects of American society. The scope of the threat was far larger than Martinez had initially understood. Foreign intelligence services and domestic extremist groups were using sophisticated communication manipulation to create confusion, spread misinformation, and undermine public trust in institutions that formed the foundation of social stability. We're fighting a war that most people don't even know is happening, Martinez observed during a classified briefing on national communication security. The battlefield is every phone call, every email, every text message where someone has to decide whether the information they're receiving is authentic or manufactured. The federal investigation revealed networks of artificial intelligence systems generating millions of synthetic communications daily, fake news reports, false social media posts, deceptive government communications, and sophisticated impersonations of trusted sources. The false emergency calls Martinez had originally encountered were just one component of a comprehensive information warfare campaign. Her role involved developing detection methods that could identify artificial communications at scale, training other analysts to recognize deception patterns, and advising on policy responses to protect critical communication infrastructure from manipulation. But the work also exposed Martinez to the full extent of technological capabilities being used against American communication systems. Foreign adversaries possessed artificial intelligence systems that could generate convincing synthetic communications in real time, responding to current events and adapting to defensive measures with sophisticated countermeasures. They're not just using scripted responses anymore, Martinez explained to a joint session of Congress investigating foreign information warfare. The AI systems can engage in extended conversations, adapt to individual communication styles, and create personalized deception campaigns targeting specific individuals or groups. The implications for democracy and social stability were profound. If voters couldn't distinguish between authentic and artificial communications from political candidates, if citizens couldn't trust that government announcements were genuine, if emergency services could be systematically manipulated and disrupted, the foundation of civic society faced existential threats. Martinez's expertise became crucial to developing national policies for protecting communication authenticity, but the solutions required balancing security measures against privacy rights and freedom of expression. Technical methods for detecting artificial communications often involved surveillance and analysis that raised constitutional concerns. We need to protect people from deception without creating a surveillance state, Martinez argued during policy discussions. The cure for false communication can't be constant monitoring of all communication. We need targeted defenses that preserve privacy while detecting sophisticated manipulation. The policy challenges were complicated by the rapid evolution of artificial intelligence technology. Detection methods that worked against current deception systems quickly became obsolete, as more advanced AI was deployed by hostile actors seeking to circumvent defensive measures. Martinez found herself at the center of debates about regulation of artificial intelligence development, international cooperation on communication security, and the role of private technology companies in preventing the weaponization of their systems for deception operations. The technology companies creating these AI systems have a responsibility to prevent their use for deception. Martinez testified during congressional hearings on artificial intelligence regulation. But they also need support from government agencies to understand the threats and develop appropriate safeguards. The work required Martinez to maintain awareness of cutting-edge artificial intelligence research, while also understanding the practical implications for people depending on communication systems for emergency assistance, news information, and social coordination. I started as someone trying to help people in crisis, Martinez reflected during a rare break from her federal responsibilities. Now I'm trying to protect the entire concept of reliable communication in a world where any voice, any message, any piece of information might be artificially manufactured to serve someone's agenda. The transition from local emergency dispatch to national security analysis had broadened Martinez's impact, but also increased the psychological burden of her expertise. The knowledge of how easily communication could be manipulated affected her ability to trust normal human interactions, even in personal relationships. Dr. Chen helped Martinez develop strategies for maintaining psychological health while working in an environment of constant deception detection. You need spaces in your life where you can experience normal human trust, Dr. Chen advised. Your professional vigilance is crucial for national security, but it can't dominate every aspect of your personal experience. 3 years into her federal career, Martinez was contacted by Agent Kowalski with news that the original false emergency call network had reconstituted itself using even more sophisticated technology and expanded operational scope. They're back, and they've learned from our previous disruption efforts, Kowalski explained during a secure video conference. The new network is using quantum-encrypted communications, distributed artificial intelligence systems, and real-time social media manipulation to create comprehensive deception campaigns that go far beyond emergency calls. The evolved network had moved from simple false emergency calls to coordinated information warfare campaigns that could manipulate multiple communication channels simultaneously. They could create fake news, reports, synthetic social media posts, artificial government communications, and false emergency calls that all reinforced the same deceptive narrative. Martinez analyzed examples of the new deception campaigns with growing concern. The artificial intelligence systems could now generate coordinated false information across multiple platforms, creating the appearance of widespread confirmation for fictional events through synthetic but convincing sources. They're not just creating individual false emergencies anymore, Martinez observed. They're manufacturing entire false realities with multiple supporting sources of fake information. Someone could receive a false emergency call, see fake news reports confirming a crisis, and read synthetic social media posts from artificial witnesses, all generated by the same AI system. The sophistication of the new network required corresponding evolution in detection and response methods. Martinez worked with federal agencies to develop comprehensive approaches that could identify coordinated deception campaigns across multiple communication platforms simultaneously. The investigation revealed that the network was targeting specific communities and regions with tailored deception campaigns, designed to exploit local concerns and political tensions. They could create artificial grassroots movements, generate false controversy around local issues, and manipulate public opinion through sophisticated psychological operations. They've weaponized social media, emergency services, news media, and government communications into a comprehensive influence operation, Dr. Walsh explained to the Federal Task Force. Traditional approaches to information security aren't adequate for this level of coordinated deception. Martinez's role expanded to include analysis of social media manipulation, fake news detection, and coordination between different types of communication platforms. Her expertise in human authenticity became crucial for identifying artificial content across various forms of digital communication. But the new threats also revealed limitations in human-based detection methods. The scale of artificial content being generated was too large for manual analysis, requiring automated systems that could apply Martinez's insights about authentic communication to detect deception at massive scale. We need to teach machines to recognize authentic human communication the way I've learned to do it, Martinez explained to the technical development team. But we also need to preserve the human judgment that can detect patterns and inconsistencies that machines might miss. The solution involved hybrid systems, combining artificial intelligence analysis with human oversight, using automated detection to identify potentially suspicious communications, while relying on human experts like Martinez to make final determinations about authenticity. The development process required Martinez to articulate intuitive knowledge about human communication patterns in ways that could be programmed into computer systems. Her years of experience detecting deception had to be translated into algorithms that could operate without human intervention. The challenge is that human communication authenticity involves subtle elements that are difficult to quantify, Martinez explained to the programming team. Emotional consistency, linguistic patterns, contextual appropriateness, these are things I recognize intuitively but struggle to describe in ways that can be coded into software. The hybrid detection systems showed promise, but also revealed new vulnerabilities. As automated detection methods improved, the deception networks developed countermeasures specifically designed to fool artificial intelligence analysis while remaining detectable to human experts. We're in an arms race where both sides are constantly adapting, Martinez observed during a quarterly review of the detection program. Every improvement in our defensive capabilities prompts corresponding advancement in their offensive techniques. The psychological toll of working in such an environment of constant technological competition affected Martinez's outlook on communication and technology generally. The knowledge that any digital interaction might be artificially generated created persistent uncertainty about the authenticity of information in all contexts. I've become professionally paranoid, Martinez told Dr. Chen during one of their sessions. My job requires me to assume that any communication might be deception, but that assumption is starting to affect how I relate to people and information in my personal life. Dr. Chen helped Martinez develop techniques for compartmentalizing her professional suspicion, creating mental boundaries between work situations that required maximum vigilance, and personal interactions where normal trust was appropriate. But the compartmentalization was challenged by the expanding scope of artificial intelligence-based deception in everyday life. Social media manipulation, fake news, synthetic media, and artificial communications were becoming common enough that professional vigilance was increasingly relevant to personal situations. The line between my job and my personal life is blurring, Martinez explained. The threats I'm trained to detect at work are now present in normal social media, news consumption, and even personal communications. I can't fully separate my professional paranoia from my daily experience. As Martinez's federal career entered its fourth year, she found herself involved in long-term strategic planning for protecting communication authenticity in an era when artificial intelligence capabilities were advancing faster than defensive measures could be developed. The National Communication Security Initiative that emerged from her work involved cooperation between government agencies, technology companies, academic institutions, and international partners to develop comprehensive approaches to preserving authentic communication in an age of sophisticated artificial intelligence. We're not just fighting current threats, Martinez explained to a gathering of international cybersecurity experts. We're trying to stay ahead of technological capabilities that don't exist yet, but will be deployed against communication systems in the near future. The strategic planning process required Martinez to envision potential future developments in artificial intelligence and their implications for communication security. The scenarios ranged from artificial intelligence systems that could perfectly replicate any individual's communication patterns to quantum computing applications that could break existing security measures. In 10 years, artificial intelligence might be able to generate perfect synthetic communications from any person based on minimal data samples. Martinez testified during congressional hearings on future technology policy. We need to develop authentication methods and social practices that can preserve trust in human communication even when perfect imitation becomes possible. The policy recommendations that emerged from Martinez's expertise included requirements for authentication technology, education programs to help people recognize artificial communications, and international agreements to prevent the weaponization of communication technology. But the solutions also required changes in how society approached information and communication generally. The assumption that seeing or hearing was believing, that voices belonged to the people claiming to speak, would need to be replaced with more sophisticated verification practices. We're moving toward a world where every important communication will need to be authenticated through multiple channels, Martinez explained during a conference on future communication security. The era of trusting information based on source identity alone is ending. People will need to verify authenticity the way I've learned to do as a professional. The cultural and social implications were profound. Educational systems would need to teach information verification skills alongside traditional literacy. Legal systems would need to develop new standards for evidence authenticity. Democratic processes would require protection against sophisticated influence operations using artificial communications. Martinez's personal experience with the psychological toll of constant authentication and verification became relevant to preparing society for a future where such vigilance would be necessary for ordinary citizens. The mental health implications of living in a world where any communication might be artificial are significant, Martinez warned during policy discussions. We need to develop social support systems and individual coping strategies for a society that can't take authentic communication for granted. Dr. Chen's work with Martinez became the foundation for broader research on the psychological impact of pervasive artificial intelligence on human communication and trust. The findings suggested that societies would need new social institutions and cultural practices to maintain human connection in an age of artificial communication. The technology is advancing faster than human psychological adaptation, Dr. Chen explained in her research publications. People evolved to trust communication based on familiar voices and social cues that can now be perfectly replicated by machines. We need to develop new instincts and social practices for an environment our psychology wasn't designed for. Martinez's career had evolved from local emergency dispatch to national security analysis to strategic planning for the future of human communication itself. Her expertise in detecting deception had become crucial to preserving authentic human interaction in an age of artificial intelligence. I never imagined that learning to detect fake emergency calls would lead to helping shape the future of human communication, Martinez reflected during a break from her strategic planning responsibilities. But the fundamental principles are the same. Protecting people's ability to trust that when they reach out for help, they're connecting with authentic human beings who care about their welfare. The work required Martinez to balance optimism about technological potential with realism about the threats posed by sophisticated artificial intelligence systems. the same technology that could improve emergency services, enhance education, and solve complex problems could also be weaponized to deceive, manipulate, and undermine social trust. Technology itself isn't the enemy, Martinez emphasized during her public speaking engagements. The challenge is ensuring that artificial intelligence serves human needs rather than being used to exploit human vulnerabilities. We need to shape the development and deployment of these technologies to preserve what's valuable about authentic human communication. 5 years after her first encounter with false emergency calls, Angela Martinez stood before the National Emergency Communications Conference as the keynote speaker, addressing an audience of 911 dispatchers, emergency services professionals, and communication security experts from across the country. Her speech, titled "The Eternal Listen," reflected on how the fundamental nature of emergency communication had evolved in response to technological threats, and the continuing importance of human judgment in an age of artificial intelligence. When I started as a 911 dispatcher, I thought my job was to answer calls and send help, Martinez began. I didn't realize I was also serving as a guardian of truth, protecting the integrity of the communication link between people in crisis and the assistance they needed. The audience included many dispatchers who had been trained in the detection methods Martinez had developed, creating a nationwide network of professionals skilled in recognizing artificial communication and sophisticated deception attempts. The threats we face today are more sophisticated than anything we could have imagined 5 years ago, Martinez continued. But the fundamental principles of authentic human communication, the inconsistencies, the emotional variations, the unpredictable elements that make us human, these remain our strongest defense against artificial deception. Martinez's federal work had expanded to include international cooperation on communication security, working with allies to develop shared approaches to protecting authentic communication from state-sponsored information warfare campaigns. The global scope of artificial intelligence-based deception required coordinated responses that transcended national boundaries, creating new forms of international cooperation focused on preserving truth in human communication. The future of democracy, of social trust, of human connection itself depends on our ability to distinguish between authentic and artificial communication, Martinez explained to the audience. Every one of you, in your daily work answering emergency calls, is serving on the front lines of that crucial mission. The speech concluded with Martinez's reflection on the personal journey that had taken her from local emergency dispatch to national security strategy. I learned to hear truth in human voices because people's lives depended on it. That skill became relevant to protecting our entire society from those who would weaponize communication against us. The lesson is that the small details matter, the subtle inconsistencies that reveal deception, the human elements that can't be perfectly replicated by machines. After the conference, Martinez returned to her federal office where new challenges awaited. Reports of quantum computing applications to communication deception, international incidents involving artificial intelligence warfare, and emerging threats that push the boundaries of current detection capabilities. But she also returned to the fundamental mission that had defined her career since that first suspicious emergency call, protecting people's ability to reach out for help and receive authentic human assistance in their moments of greatest need. The war for communication authenticity continued, fought one call at a time, one voice at a time, one moment of human connection preserved against the forces that would corrupt and manipulate it for their own purposes. Martinez's office overlooked the Potomac River, where she could watch planes approaching Reagan National Airport, each carrying people who depended on the communication systems she helped protect. The sight reminded her daily of the human stakes involved in her technical work. Her personal phone buzzed with a text from Doctor. Jen. Remember that your vigilance protects more than just communication systems. It preserves people's ability to trust that reaching out for help will connect them with someone who cares. That's the most human thing there is. Martinez smiled, saving the message as a reminder of why her work mattered. In a world where artificial intelligence could replicate almost any aspect of human communication, the one thing that remained irreplaceable was genuine human concern for others' welfare. That evening, Martinez listened to her radio scanner as she drove home, a habit from her dispatch days that she'd never quite broken. The emergency calls were routine. Traffic accidents, medical calls, domestic disturbances, all genuine, all connecting people in crisis with professionals trained to help. The system worked because people like Martinez stood guard, listening for the subtle discordances that revealed deception, preserving the spaces where authentic human communication could still exist in an age of artificial everything. The frequency of truth remained strong, protected by those who had learned to hear it clearly through all the electronic noise and synthetic voices that filled the modern communication spectrum. As she pulled into her secure parking garage, Martinez reflected on how far she'd traveled from that first confusing night when fake emergency calls had disrupted her routine. The journey had taken her to the highest levels of national security, but it had also brought her back to the fundamental human need for authentic connection in times of crisis. The eternal listen continued, the ongoing effort to preserve truth in human communication, one genuine voice at a time, against all the forces that would corrupt and manipulate it. And somewhere, in emergency dispatch centers across the country, trained professionals maintained their vigilant watch, ready to detect the next evolution in the war for authentic communication. Martinez's final log entry that night captured the essence of her evolving mission. The technology will continue advancing, the threats will keep evolving, but the human need for authentic connection remains constant. Our job is to guard that connection, to preserve the spaces where people can reach out for help and know they're connecting with genuine human beings who care about their welfare. The eternal listen continues. Outside her window, the city hummed with millions of communications, phone calls, text messages, radio transmissions, most of them authentic human connections between people sharing information, expressing feelings, reaching out for help or offering assistance. The vast majority of human communication remained genuine, protected by people like Martinez who had learned to detect and counter the artificial voices that sought to corrupt and manipulate that precious human connection. The war for truth continued, but so did the fundamental human capacity for authentic communication, preserved by those who had chosen to listen carefully enough to hear the difference.